Theaters.
Yep. Can we have a roll call?
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Romack?
Here.
Vice Mayor Klostad?
Here.
Mayor Zabriskie?
Here.
Councilmember Henderson?
Here.
And I'll note Councilmember Pallavi is absent.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and calling the meeting to order, if you would all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, the first order of business is general comments for any item that's not on the agenda, which means anything that doesn't have to do with the budget. And I realize everything has to do with the budget, but in the strict form of a matter, this is the opportunity for general comments. Commenter will have 3 minutes. Appreciate if they state their name and come on up to the podium.
Hey there. Okay, good afternoon, Mayor Zabriskie, Vice Mayor Klostad, council members, and Town of Truckee staff. My name is Katie Hawkins. I'm a resident of the Town of Truckee and a Donner Lake neighborhood resident. I'm grateful to the council members and staff's commitment to providing the highest level of community service and engagement. Over the years, I have been able to work with many of you on initiatives around Donner Lake, like the Truckee Day cleanup days along West End Beach, where I picked up trash with Councilmember Henderson and her son. Last year, even though Councilmember Pallavi isn't here, I hosted an event with Congressman Kiley on winter outdoor recreation in and around Donner Lake. Oh, and then in February 2021, I worked with town staff and the Parks and Rec Department as a commissioner for the Division of Boating and Waterways, where we were able to secure a $1.7 million grant to address deferred maintenance and improvement of the boat launch and the parking lot. Okay, everyone in this room deeply cares about our community and would argue that Donner Lake is the crown jewel of the Sierra Nevada. I'm here on behalf of my neighbors and community members at Donner Lake to express our concerns of the year-round frequent instances of excessive speeds, negligence, making it dangerous for pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers. Sadly, in March 2025, there was an incident where an individual tragically lost their life and another individual seriously injured due to an impact with a vehicle in a high traffic area of Donner Lake. I'm here to present to the council members and staff a support letter of 82 community members that signed on, asking that the following actions be taken place immediately by the Town of Truckee, Nevada County, and Sugar Bowl Resort. Point one, staff time and resources be allocated to perform a traffic calming study on the section of Donner Lake along that high traffic zone. 2, to allow public comment and engagement on the recommendations to ensure that community members can have input on the proposed path forward. 3, a shared cost agreement to be entered into and the implementation of recommendations to be paid for by the parties that I listed. I have been informed that I will need to ask council members to have time at future meetings to make a presentation. That being said, I would ask that in order to present to this group, I will need to have staff support in collecting the data to be shared in a presentation. I believe that we can collaborate on this initiative as you all have committed to the Donner Lake Interagency Partnership for Stewardship, which goal number 6 outlines transportation, safety, and parking provide access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transportation systems, improving road safety and expanding public transportation options without impacts to the lake's resources. In closing, I appreciate the leadership of this team to help ensure that we are working together to better serve the mission of the town and the safety of our community members. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Now, are there any other general public comments? Then coming back to this comment, with the agreement agreement of my fellow council members, can we either put this on for further discussion or wrap it into the work plan discussion?
I would very much so support that. I've had a couple of conversations with community members. I have some ideas of what areas that we could, or things that we could do on a simple level. As it's not agendized, I would like it to be agendized so that we can talk about more openly and have a public presentation to share our concepts and our concerns and a path forward. This is our major recreation destination in our community, and we definitely need to invest in its safety.
Do we have general consensus on that direction? Looks like it.
Yeah, I guess just, I would think this would make more sense to talk about at the end of our meeting, because we don't typically set agenda items for our next meetings right after public comment. So I would just, while I support it moving forward, just point of order sort of thing to keep us thinking about that.
I think there are also some possibilities in our CIP discussions we're about to have that we can include some potential ideas.
Okay, looks like we're going to have some follow-up, and we can cogitate on it and come back with further direction.
I'll make a note to clarify anything that we need clarification on as you continue to discuss it.
Thank you. Okay, with that being all of the general comments, we can now proceed on to the budget workshop. That's item 5.1. And Nikki, will you be leading the discussion?
Nikki will be leading the discussion. I just would like to start out by saying this is something you're very familiar with. All of you have sat through this for a few times now. For today, we're really focused on capital projects. We're not asking you to make big decisions. If we're generally on the right path, let us know. If we're not prioritizing things according to a consensus of the five of you, that would be helpful to hear. There's opportunity to make changes as we keep iterating through this. And I also want to acknowledge all of the town staff. This is a really big lift. You have a big budget. It's the annual operating budget, the 5-year capital budget, and trying to understand where the priorities are and what we have capacity to really tackle and take on and do well. So a lot of staff are here, but thank you for all your hard work in doing this. And also to the finance team who lives and breathes this for about 3 months up to this date. So thank you for all your hard work on that. And then we will be excited in either the May or the June meeting to show you the new budget software and how that will look for the public. It seems to be much easier, I think, to maneuver through and understand. So we'll be excited to demo that in an upcoming budget workshop as well. Just to remind council and the community, this is your first workshop. You'll have another workshop in May, the second meeting in May, and then we'll be back in June for adoption. So you get two more looks at this before we're really saying yes. So keep that in mind. And with that, Nikki, take it away.
And when she said I'm going to be leading it, we're actually going to be we're going to be taking turns. So we're going to rotate through the different divisions based on they're going to present their own capital projects, just because I am not the expert on those and I don't want to give you guys any misleading information. I'm like, oh yeah, the bridge is floating in the air. No, I wouldn't say that, but you know what I mean? So we just want to make sure the expert is speaking to the individual projects. So we did want to start by looking at some of the operating priorities that we have plugged into the budget so that council can kind of get an initial idea of what staff is thinking. We did have an organizational assessment that they've been working on for a significant time, and that those results are going to be presented to council at the next council meeting. Two really big recommendations out of that assessment were regarding staffing and then software. And so we did put a lot of focus in this next budget proposal on staffing and software. So we wanted to give some highlights of that. So some projected service enhancements that we have in the current draft of the budget include a second emergency services staff member that would be funded via Measure E. And we also have the expansion of the wildfire insurance coverage. That would be a temporary expansion to align with the CAL FIRE high severity fire zones that council recently adopted. And that would give town staff time to assist homeowners with hardening efforts. In the Public Works Department, we are proposing the addition of an engineering manager to improve overall division efficiency. We are also including a GIS intern that's new. That's not a full-time position, but something else that we are looking to add. And then also adding 2 full-time trail maintenance and landscape workers. 75% of the funding for those positions would come from the recently adopted Measure U, with the remainder coming from the community facility districts. And that would be for the snow removal, sidewalk maintenance, and landscape maintenance in those districts. And that would allow the town to fulfill its commitment to the community for year-round trail access and well-maintained trails. In the road maintenance division, we are proposing the addition of a safety and training coordinator. The organizational assessment will speak to this as well, but this will help the division continue to maintain a robust safety program and a robust safety culture. As we know, road maintenance work is very dangerous, and so promoting safety to the highest order is a best practice and something we want to do here at the town as well. That person would be responsible for ensuring that all staff receive adequate training and the appropriate certificates to operate all the equipment that they are responsible for, safety inspections at various job sites, and then also ensuring that everyone has adequate personal protective equipment. I'll let you read that and keep going. In other departments, we are proposing the addition of an administrative technician for the Keep Truckee Green division. 80% of that funding would come from the solid waste fund, so ultimately that would be reimbursed via the ratepayers, and then 20% would come from the general fund. This would help increase capacity to meet the really robust state reporting requirements that have increased over the recent years, and also enforcement requirements. And also shift some of the administrative tasks that our higher level positions are handling and allow them to kind of focus on those higher level programs that we want to implement here in the town. In public safety, we're proposing to convert the police administrative manager position to a police administrative sergeant position. That position, the manager position, is currently vacant, and after kind of working through what that would look like, we feel like this would be the best option for the department. There's a lot of benefits of this conversion, so this one's not a new giant hit to the general fund since it's a conversion. And then in the building and safety division, we're proposing to add a deputy chief building official. We have a temporary plans examiner position, and her term is ending at the end of fiscal year 25-26. So this would be kind of an upstaff for 1 year, but then we would drop down one person after her term ended. And that would help with succession planning in the event when our chief building official retired, we would have somebody kind of who could would be potentially a good replacement, and then also providing additional capacity to existing staff to help with trainings and help expand their breadth of knowledge of the building and safety codes. I'm going to take a pause because that was a lot. Anything else that you guys have questions on?
It is a lot, and Nikki mentioned this, but the Baker Tilly assessment report will be presented May 13th, and the kind of overarching theme in that report is how understaffed the town is for the workload that we have. So you're going to hear a lot more detail about that directly from the team that did the assessment. It's worth noting that all of these recommended staff positions that Nikki just went through are in alignment with the recommendations that we've seen out of Baker Tilly, with 2 exceptions. The Baker Tilly assessment was recommending a higher level position in sustainability. We're recommending the admin tech to kind of balance out those administrative tasks and then see what's needed after that. And then the deputy chief building official is not a position called out in the Baker Tilly assessment. They do speak to succession planning and being sure that we are following best practices with succession planning. So we see this in alignment with that recommendation, but not necessarily their specific staffing recommendations. Just wanted to point that out.
Is this an opportunity in your pause to ask a couple of questions before you move forward? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mayor, may I proceed? I just real quickly, the safety training coordinator for Public Works, that's a general fund position.
Correct.
It seems most of the positions are being funded by either bond measures or rate paying, as in the sustainability position. But this is a full general fund, and probably the building inspector or building plans reviewer, both of those would be general fund.
The deputy chief building official would be a building and safety fund funded position. So,
And that's offset by revenues from permits.
correct.
Are there any others that we are recommending that are general fund solely?
Yeah, so there's 3 more positions.
Okay, that we
here.
haven't gotten to. Okay.
We haven't got to. I was like, wow, that was a lot. Maybe I should pause for a minute.
Great.
So the last 3 positions are for internal facing divisions in order to support all these new efforts. And that would be for a human resource technician, a business analyst. The business analyst would be primarily focused on helping us to implement all the software recommendations, and also they would kind of work with different divisions to figure out where pain points are. So right now, I think we have some pain points regarding the options we have available for people to pay for things for the town. So that they would, this person would kind of be the person we would say, hey, this is a pain point for the community. They would go out and help us find solutions, help us implement them, and help them get them integrated into our existing structure. The first task that this person will be set up with is implementing a new ERP system for the community development department, which is also included in the budget, and somebody will speak to that during this presentation. And then, ongoing, they'll kind of be our pain point relief person. And then the last one would be an accountant. And that's just where, based on the organizational assessment and speaking to staff and kind of understanding the workload, the HR tech and the accountant are to help kind of balance out the workload.
Okay.
Nothing super exciting or special about those.
The information and technology building analysts, they are not related to our CIP for economic development, though. Those are different.
The business analyst is a software systems business analyst. Programs like Excella that we would be looking to implement is what Nikki was referring to. We'd have to go through an RFP process, so it might not be Excella exactly, but that's a big lift and a lot of staff time to implement a big system like that. So this would be the staff lead for that. Baker Tilly didn't recommend any specific technology systems, but just leveraging technology more for efficiency. So there's a number of them after that that we see coming forward to the town in future years. For the first year, I think the business analyst is budgeted to be split between the building fund and the general fund to support that implementation. And then in years after that, it would likely be significantly funded in the general fund, maybe hit some of the enterprise funds depending on what work is happening.
And that, the example of Acela being the building permit tracking.
Correct.
process, yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think Nikki might have underplayed the human resource division staffing and accountant position, but we don't often talk about this with council when we're bringing forward new programs, but as our staffing levels have increased and state law changes have come into effect, just the amount of work within HR, and it's very cyclical, you can't predict when situations will come up. We've not added HR staff in recent years, and so that is a division that is really understaffed for the number of FTEs that we have. And then in the finance division, there's grant reporting requirements that have increased significantly as we've added many of our programs that require reimbursements, lease to locals, rooted renters, you name it. It's
Community
processing.
facilities districts, there's a
Yes.
significant amount of accounting.
It's processing all those payments, and we haven't staffed the department up to take on those additional roles. So they're kind of constantly trying to keep up with their annual reporting requirements and all these new programs. So didn't want to underplay the importance of those positions.
Thank you for elaborating on that, Jen.
Before we go to the other council members, want to welcome Councilmember Pallavi. Only thing you missed was a general comment on Donner Lake traffic safety and the positions, the additional positions are the first thing we've talked about on the budget. Councilmember Romack, do you have any questions just on these?
No, but in our samples slide presentation, there was a graph showing, I don't know if that's the next one, but I just wanted to mention to Vice Mayor's questions. I thought that, yeah, that was helpful. I don't have any further questions.
Councilmember Henderson?
I only have one, I think. The safety and training coordinator and road maintenance. We obviously want a really strong culture of safety and safety outcomes. Have we had safety incidents necessitating this position? I'm just curious sort of what some of the other ones you kind of gave a little bit more of a rationale for the why.
So I think this is similar to the accountant and the human resource technician. The demands on the department have been increasing. Before, it was reasonable to, spread the burden and members of the staff would kind of take each piece, but that just given the increase in workload and the increasing demands, going forward, we see it as kind of a need to have a centralized person kind of managing that to ensure that we're not leaving any holes, and making sure we have like a broad and robust program.
Great, thank you.
I have just one question. Isn't one of these positions being paid out of a special fund in the first year and then we switch to a general fund? I thought I saw that in the staff report somewhere.
That would be the information technology business analyst.
Okay, and so initially, how are they being funded before they go to general fund?
Half the funding for that is coming from the building and safety division, because in the first year, their primary task is going to be managing the process of system implementation for the community development department.
Okay. Let's go on to the next item then.
So then after that, we did want to kind of highlight, if there are specific softwares that you want us to speak to, I will, but I won't make you guys go through each one of these. I think they kind of speak to themselves. As Jen said, we were given a recommendation to leverage software for increased efficiency. So the biggest one that we're looking at is a community development enterprise resource system software. And the goal with that conversion would be to find a software that has a public-facing portal to track projects so that members of the public can track their permits and projects as they move through the processes, that we want to offer expanded online payment options and potentially have the ability to incorporate encroachment permitting and special event permitting into the software. Our current software doesn't provide those capabilities. And that was something when we initially invested in New World, they had a really big plan to invest millions of dollars into their community development module, but they got bought out by Tyler. And when they got bought out, Tyler said, "Oh, we're not going to invest in that anymore." So we kind of knew that this was needed, and so this is kind of like next year's our year. We're going to do it and move forward with this new software. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I would just add that $500,000, I'll call it a placeholder because we haven't gone through a solicitation process. I would guess that might be a little bit low compared to what we see come back, but it's a reasonable enough placeholder for what we know at this point.
And are we asking quick
Go ahead.
questions?
Yes.
I know that believe I saw a new parking program as another technological advancement. Is there an opportunity for those two to talk? I think some of the pain points have to do with having so many different payment systems at the town. That's probably one of your department's pain points. Are we looking at, is there something overarching that is going to address that? Or are you still going to be dealing with just multiple payment acceptance systems, whether it's happens to be for parking, whether it happens to be for a permit? You're going to have just a bunch of different income lines coming in.
I think that's a really challenging thing for every government agency because there isn't really one company that does everything well. So in order for us to provide the most efficient system for people to pay for parking, it may not be the same as a system that provides community development. I think that is what we envision the business analyst to help with is kind of finding ways to create connections between these softwares and then, you know, as we are implementing, helping to kind of be that overarching voice and, you know, person with all the knowledge who can kind of be like, hey, like, is there a way that we can leverage this software to do this so that, you know, and kind of having that knowledge and having that, I'm not saying this well.
Yeah,
It's consistent. To me, it's consistency, right? It's like, are we going to create a consistent payment system that encompasses all or not, which is okay. But quickly on the parking system, at least, again, yet another pain point is that you have this sort of like external parking system going on with like actual parking meters, right? Like physical things that are out there. And then you have this like permit system, which is this entirely separate system, right? So just however we can continue to blend all of that and make this smoother for the consumer, to me, that is the goal at the end of the day. So I just want to make sure both of these programs are going to do those things that you need them to do.
I think we've heard that's the goal and the frustration. So we will try to find a system that can incorporate as much as possible. I don't know that we will get a parking system with our other permit systems, but if we reduce it down to just a couple, it's better than where we currently are.
Yeah, I guess, and what I was referring to maybe on the parking system was just it seemed like this was very focused on like the external parking system, but yet we also have this entirely internal permit, employee, non-employee, daily, other rate, 12 rates going on. So just as long as it can adhere to all of that, I think that, again, is the ideal situation.
Following up on Councilmember Pallavi's questioning, this would be integrated with the parking district infrastructure, the CIP that we have, that we're going to come to later.
Alfred, do you want to come? As long as we're talking about it now, let's just answer your questions with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming the left hand knows what the right hand's doing.
You never know. They work in different departments.
Hopefully it's not a sign of things to come. Back to Councilmember Pallavi's question. Yes. So this parking management program software. We had Velocum before, not to get into proprietary, but it was way outdated, and even the vendor at the time had gone out of business and it had transferred ownership, and then they didn't have a lot of the software upgrades and everything. So this parking management software program update does integrate both Flowbird, who is our hardwired infrastructure out there, and then also Data Ticket is what we bought and purchased now, which is replacing Velocum, and those are integrated. So now you'll see the parking management district CSOs out there and parking techs with handheld devices now. Now they can, with the whole pay by license plate and pay by app and text and everything, now they can pull up everything directly when they're out in the field. Before, they couldn't do that before, so we couldn't implement that type of technology. It was all still pay by display, pay by meter, go back to your car and do all that. So these all do integrate everything right now, and it does go back to the CIP also. So this number is actually embedded into that CIP number.
Okay.
And then also we'll be next year looking at the integration of license plate readers as well. So that's the biggest purchase next year. So all that does come into play where they are integrated now. Both Data Ticket would Councilmember Pallavi mentioned also, with Data Ticket is now we can look to in the future for permitting programs, whether it's residential permits, by zones, by employees, so we don't have to allocate employees to certain areas of the district also that it'll be recognized by their license plate and by their permit also. So this does integrate all that. As Nikki mentioned, and I think Jen mentioned as well, there is a certain point where Flowbird, in this instance, does collect all the information, does collect all the payment systems and everything. So that one's hard to separate from any other type of permit collections or other accounting software. So this one will have to stay kind of as its own system, if you will, both with the hard infrastructure that's out that you see on the street, as well as the back end type of permitting program. But those two are integrated now, though, based on the new technology that we have and the upgrades that we've done out in the field in terms of updating all the parking meters themselves also, and having the pay by app technology, pay by text technology, and all the credit card batching. So even though it is another system, it is a closed system when it comes to parking, if you will.
Thank you. Any other council questions on this slide?
Well, I had a question relating more towards the parking CIP. Should I wait till we get to that point? Okay.
I think that would be best.
Were there any other softwares that you guys wanted to talk about?
Maybe.
Go ahead.
I don't.
Oh, no?
Go ahead.
Okay. So with that, we are hoping that council will give us approval to start advertising for the following positions. Employment wouldn't start until after July 1st, but we're trying to get everything going. And that would be the HR tech position. And that would help us with the recruitments after that. And then the administrative technician for Keep Truckee Green, and then the 2 trails positions for Public Works, and that would help us with summer maintenance activities.
Thoughts?
Sounds great. Go forth.
Fully supportive.
Okay. So we're spending about 14 or 15 million right now on personnel, and this would add another million. Yeah.
I can
I think
pull
I
up
put the exact number in the staff report for
Yeah.
both the general fund and then the total contribution.
Yeah.
It's
What's
a
that, 900?
significant amount of new staffing.
Right.
And you will see when you hear the results of the operational assessment, we will still be understaffed.
Okay, one.
Mayor, one other
Yes.
thing. I know in our initial discussions back in January about what we were anticipating from this, there was, I guess you were just alluding to that. We're still understaffed in some areas, and police was one of the recommendations. We do have a position transition here, but no additional officers.
There's no additional officers at this time. So there's the admin sergeant, which is the reclassification, and there's an additional emergency management coordinator position to work in emergency services. There's a number of additional sworn and non-sworn positions recommended in Baker Tilly that you'll be able to you'll hear at the next meeting and be able to have a conversation about. Those aren't in the initial list of the recommendations, and we've been looking at this as kind of a 10-year roadmap, if you will, of how we need to staff up over the next 10 years and how we're going to finance that. We've added 2 police officer positions 2 years ago, I believe, in the budget, and that kind of got us back to where the town used to be. But we kind of took that into consideration of some of the other departments that haven't received staffing.
It helps that we're fully staffed there, though.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's some discomfort here because we're being asked to piecemeal an addition without an overview of the entire budget or knowing what else is coming down the line in terms of increases and decreases.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, and I would just add that we would start the advertisement for these. The advertisements wouldn't even be closed by the time you get to your next budget workshop. And we might not even be interviewed by the time you get to June adoption. It's that long of a process to start it. Would be helpful if something happens that you change your mind, we wouldn't be hiring a position yet.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilmember Paula.
Yeah, and I think what you're referring to there is if at some point in the next month we determine some position position changes, there's still time to do that, potentially. Is that what you're inferring?
Correct. And these positions were selected as the first kind of tier because the trials positions are funded through the trials tax. You've heard from the community that that's a priority, so that seemed like a natural one. We need additional HR staffing just to help with onboarding future staff.
Yep.
And then the admin tech position from a staffing resources and how we're using our higher level staff in terms of administrative tasks is a better use of staff time.
And you potentially walked into this question perfectly. We added two words, economic vitality, to our strategic goals this year. You explicitly say in some page of our staff report that you're not anticipating ramping that up in the near term. So my question was going to be, what is the less than near, but also, or more than near, but less than medium plan for addressing some of the needs that came up through that, and sort of what your timing is on maybe a person or so in there as well?
It's a great question. I think I added in the staff report. If not, I had it definitely in my head that is the position that I'm still uncomfortable with that we don't have in the list to add this current year, and seeing if there is a way to make that happen. So there could be a change that you see to this list at your next meeting. We do want to move forward with the Economic Vitality Action Plan to give us that roadmap. So that's in the CIP and intended to be started this next fiscal year. But that is the area I'm probably most uncomfortable in that we haven't addressed completely.
Still on that topic, so the Economic Vitality Strategic Plan, that's for the next fiscal year, 25, 26.
That's correct, and we'll have a CIP slide on that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, next.
So the purpose of the remaining workshop time is to go over the CIPs. So we're going to be reviewing new CIPs. We're going to ask you to let us know if you're good with us adding them. For current CIPs, we're going to ask that you let us know if we should continue to work on them. And for any canceled or paused CIPs, we're going to ask you if we should continue to hold off. As always, we're looking for majority consensus on any of those decisions. And something to note is that there were a couple projects that the town was made aware of while we were close to wrapping up our budget. So they are not currently included in the work plan or the proposed budget. And, that's up to you guys if you want to discuss them or not. That includes the Comprehensive Townwide Child Care Action Committee, the Community Facilities District for Commercial Row Trash Management, and an R2SC approach for the rail yard area, as well as the Donner Lake Traffic Study Calming Study. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becky. We tried to limit the number of people who are presenting, so Becky and Alfred are up first.
While Becky and Alfred are coming up, just as something for you to keep in mind, we plan to bring back the first draft of the work plan at the second meeting in May. That's in coordination with the second budget meeting that you'll be having, so you can see how they align. But we will consider that a workshop as well, and then have you adopt in June, so there'll be time for you to go back and think about it before actually adopting. So it's a little different than we've done in previous years.
You said the first meeting in May?
Second meeting in May.
Seating.
Okay, thank you. So again, I'm Becky Bucar, Assistant Public Works Director, and I'm here with Alfred Knotts, Transportation Program Manager. There's a lot of words on the next few slides. I'm not going to go through all of this, but the purpose of them is really to sort of take you through our thought process on how we decided to prioritize what projects get funded first and what get tackled for it first. There'll probably be some disappointment in terms of not everything is getting done all at the same time, but want to kind of get you through our process. So we have, when we thought about what projects to fund and the timing of them, we're thinking about are there projects that are already been started? And so you'll see in green, these projects are ones that are committed. There's funding that has been set aside. There's timing constraints on the funding. We've committed to our partners that we're going to work on these projects, or we're really far down the road, so it doesn't make sense to stop them. In red, we're showing these are projects that we've committed to. There may be funding already assigned, but maybe there's a little bit of flexibility. And then the ones in gray are more, they're definitely council priorities, but there's a little more flexibility in terms of when they happen. So just as an example, looking at the roads and streetscape category, Reimagine Bridge Street, that's something we've been working on a long time. We don't want to stop that. Downtown Railroad pedestrian crossing, that's one that Alfred's working on. It's about halfway through the process, maybe a little bit less, but we've got some momentum. There's a funding deadline there. West River Street parking lot, and this project includes a new parking lot across from the Del Bay Umoe Park and some frontage improvements and a street realignment. We haven't started that design, but there has been sort of a commitment to the community to build parking out there. It's something, we've got momentum in that area, so that's why we put that one, we prioritized that one a little bit ahead of some of these other ones. We have a bridge maintenance project. In general, we're not really recommending that we defer our kind of ongoing maintenance projects. When we get behind on those, that causes issues. Delaying paving projects by 1 year means a whole lot of paving projects the next year. And we have a lot of roads that need work. So, and then the ones in gray here are ones that we have a little more flexibility. They've been, some of them in our CIP project list for a long time, but they haven't either have been started or they've been paused. So you did have these slides in the packet, so I'm not going to spend much of time on them. We can talk about them more or go back to these slides if you have questions. On this next slide, these are just more categories of projects. So we've got transit and parking projects, sustainability projects. I will note that we listed out the fencing and security gates project, which I think the police are going to talk about a little bit more later. It's actually led by the police department because the engineering staff will be providing some support, reviewing plans, and helping that project through. We did kind of list it here. And another one here, the Donner Lake Bank Restoration Project. That's one that's really being led by the Truckee River Watershed Council, but we're providing funding and we are going to be reviewing the plans. Then another way that we were kind of looking at things is, or to another way to look at it is when we are proposing to kind of work on things or when they're scheduled. So in our draft budget, we've got construction this summer. We have the West River Street, the park project. We're going to wrap that up. We are going to construct the trail connection on Riverview Sports Park. There's a grant funding associated with that. The project will be ready to go out to bid next month. Paving and drainage, I already talked about how we're going to do one of those every year. We have a project that we're partnering with the Tahoe Honor Association on to do some roadside vegetation management, and then another project. I'm going to talk about those a little bit later in a different slide, so I won't get into those. Then projects that we're just actively working on are listed here in this middle piece. So I think a lot of these are projects that you're familiar with. Continuing to work on the building on the mobility hub and continuing to pursue the van pool pilot program. And Alfred's going to talk about some of these a little bit more in future slides. And then we've got these annual ongoing projects, the ones that are just going to kind of show up every year, like our trails paving, annual paving, recess striping. We've kind of combined that into one bid document this year to try to gain some efficiencies. But we do want to do those projects every year. And again, the bridge maintenance projects, and then the ongoing public art master plan implementation. So this is where it gets a little more interesting. So you'll see here, we've got a list of projects that we plan to initiate in the coming fiscal year. And next to those projects, you'll see we are saying LOE. So that is supposed to represent the level of effort of these projects. So you'll see the Tahoe Honor Trail. That is a project that we're partnering with the Tahoe Honor Association on. They would be leading the design. So our involvement is pretty limited. We're providing some funding through TSSA. The West River Street parking lot, that's a pretty high level of effort project. The bridge maintenance project, a lower level of effort project. And the guardrail project, we just recently received some grant funds. some HSIP funds. We want to get that project built in 2026. We think it's important to get those guardrails replaced for safety purposes. And then you'll see we have planned initiation in fiscal year 25-26 for the active transportation plan update, really starting in early 2026. And then the rest of the projects on the right-hand side here are ones that we have planned for future fiscal years. And the years in parentheses next to these projects represent the year that we plan to initiate, essentially. So they're chronologically ordered. As you can see, we've got the Public Service Center Transit Facility Expansion Project going starting in 2026. And some of the streetscape projects getting delayed a little bit more into 2027 and 2028. And then some of our roundabout projects even later, Northwoods, Donner Pass Road not starting until 2029, or in Brockway Soaring, 267 in 2030. So again, we've kind of tried to put together, this ties very directly to our work plan and how many staff resources we have and how much funding we have available. So this is sort of our best stab at planning for these various projects and the timing of them. Some of the, Nikki just had a slide about this.
Well, we have time to talk about those individually as you move through these.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've got
Even the out year ones.
yes.
Awesome.
We can come
Thank
back
you.
to that. I want to give you some more information about what might. I have a feeling you might want to move some around. So my next slide is going to get into some options for you. But this is just to reiterate that a couple of these CIPs aren't CIPs for these projects. So downtown CFD expansion. There was a request from the Downtown Merchants Association to sort of create a downtown CFD for Commercial Row, and at the same time sort of look at options for a downtown alley, management, trash management project. We really think that if you're going to do a new CFD in Commercial Row, you might want to look at consolidating CFDs in the area. So we think that's a bigger project, kind of a standalone. But again, it's not in any of this. And then the R2SD-like approach to the rail yard, that's also not in here. So again, the key, remember, green means it's committed, red means it's committed, but it's flexible. Gray means not committed yet, and then the level of effort. So here's a slide that we put together to give you some options, and I'll just say thank you to Scott and Jessica who are in the audience. They've spent a lot of time working with me on this and putting these slides together, in fact, to give you some things to think about. We have prioritized the Trout Creek Restoration Reach 1 project to start. We've already started it. We've got a contract in place with the designer. We have made a commitment to Lahontan to get that done by 2029. So we are recommending to kind of keep working on that. If the council so desire, that is one we could pause. We would lose a lot of momentum. Like I said, we have consultants on board currently working on it. There's a roadway vegetation management project. There's a few. There's one that we are proposing to do this year, which is it's a smaller project focused on the west end of Donner Lake. And it's really focusing on a section of South Shore Drive, Donner Pass Road west of South Shore Drive, and Donner Lake Road. And we are working with the Truckee Fire Protection District to sort of help on the outreach of that and potentially even expand the limits of that to go into some of the private properties. So that is something we're planning to go forward with in 2025. That's one we could delay. We have a vegetation, this 2412 is a vegetation management project that would be in coordination with Nevada County. They have FEMA funds available for this. They actually received the funds maybe a year ago, but they've indicated that they won't be ready to work on that until 2027. So that's one that we could potentially delay even further. The parking lot project is one that we've got the park was built. There's been sort of a interest in the community getting more parking built out there, but that's one that could get delayed. The transit facility expansion project, that is, I'll let Alfred talk about this a little bit more on a slide that he has, but that one is one that we feel is important. We've got our transit operations occurring out of 2 different facilities right now, and they're also kind of working out of one of them is working out of the Public Service Center, and there's definitely some conflicts between our roads division and the transit. It'd be nice to separate those out, and it is a long project to get a building designed, and things aren't going to get any cheaper. So that was one that we were recommending to start in 2026. Guardrail project, because we have the funding and it's a relatively low level of effort, we're proposing that's one that we're hoping to do in 2026, but we could postpone it, I think, a year or two and still meet the grant deadlines. And again, the Jaboom Street Sidewalk Improvement Project, that's one that we don't have starting until 2027. That is one that maybe the council wants to talk about moving forward. And active transportation plan update, I think we have a slide about that one a little bit later, but we've heard from the council that was a priority, so we tried to figure out how to move that one as far forward and get that started as soon as possible. So our current plan would really be to start that in the beginning of 2026. So I think now, here's just a little graph that just shows you where we're spending the money and where the concentration is. All the stuff in the lower right-hand corner is mostly planning projects. That's why it's all focused on town hall there. And then we get into the various CIPs. So I don't know if you want to pause here a little bit, or you want us to go through the CIP slides?
My recommendation would be to go through the CIP slides and then come back to this, because I think staff has some great suggestions here to consider.
I have some sort of high-level stuff that are maybe less specific to the individual CIPs. Maybe.
Share your thoughts, and then we'll run through the CIPs and come back around.
Yeah. So I guess just from the highest level of thinking, and now this being our 6th budget, and I feel like we've been pretty clear at some of the things that we do want to see move through. And maybe the West River Street parking lot sort of hits one out of those, but the other ones are somewhat questionable. We've been sort of backed into some of them, I think, Trout Creek specifically as an example. And I really appreciate Scott and Jessica's work over the last number of years, working really hard on some other CIP projects. And I guess what I'm not seeing is sort of a reflection of what we talked about last year, quite honestly, which also includes, and I don't see it on here, but I sort of included Jaboom sidewalks in addition to Jaboom Bridge and Church Street. Like, to me, I was always trying to combine those, even though I know they're somewhat different, but at the very minimum, what I guess I'm sort of failing to see in the HR slides, which we just got done with, and now that we're moving on to this, is just a capacity. Like, how are we dealing with, we don't seem to be dealing with the capacity constraints that we've been talking about specifically in your department for a couple of years now. And at least in my opinion, the overwhelming appetite from the 5 of us to see more progress specifically on some of those CIPs, some of those more public-facing CIPs. We've heard about, I get it, Church Street, it's complicated. We're going to get there.
Before staff answers, let's go ahead and run through the CIPs, because
Well, maybe I can give
I think
a
it's
little bit.
thematic. That's what I'm asking for.
maybe
I'm
I
looking
could-
for like a thematic reason why we're not increasing our HR specifically in this department, specifically to address CIPs, regardless of the individual.
What I want to do
CIPs.
is hold off finding out where we actually are in agreement and where we're not until after we hear.
Yeah, that's fine. Regardless of voting for different CIP projects and playing that game again, I guess that's more thematically what I'm interested in understanding.
So Jen, if you want to just give thematic, general.
Sure. We
statements.
are adding staffing to engineering. So we are adding back in the engineering manager position, which is a pretty high level capacity. We got to feel out who is filling those roles to understand what might change in this picture. And then when requests come in for like CFDs, you might want to have that conversation before we get too far into a Jaboom sidewalk, right? Because it might all link together. But overall theme, and I think what you were going to hear from Baker Tilly, is the town cannot afford to continue funding the number of capital projects we have funded because you are so short-staffed throughout your organization. So unless you're willing to take away funding from programs like housing or other priority areas and divert it into capital infrastructure projects, you just simply can't maintain those. So that was why the effort went into developing these level of interest, knowing that we haven't met those. And there's only one other additional recommendation for staffing and engineering in the Baker Tilly report. They are not recommending adding additional staffing and engineering to a high level because you can't continue to afford these capital projects at the rate we've been doing them and maintain the right staffing levels.
So can you just clarify? I guess I was assuming the engineering manager was part of this succession planning. Are you intending to maintain a director of public works, an assistant director, an engineering manager?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That wasn't clear. Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate your response, and I don't think we've ever been asked that question.
I don't think you have either.
Right, and so I'm more than happy to have that question when and if the time arises and when you want to have that. But to me,
I think
I agree with you.
Yeah, the Baker Tilly is the tool to have that conversation now that that's kind of been their conclusion in their work. Is
Not the budget.
Well, you can have it today too, but I think you're going to have
We're
it in a
talking about
couple
the
weeks as well.
Right. Okay. So
as
that
you
would
go-
be a conversation I would be very interested in because I do think there's some balance that can take place there.
And so as you go through the CIPs, and you have the opportunity to tell us what the effect is on the workload, for the sub-departments, please go ahead and do that so we can keep that in mind when we start picking them apart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I continue then? Okay, so, and I think tonight what we're hoping is we're probably not going to be able to give you a full, okay, we'll move this one around, we'll do this, but we want to get your feedback. And then we'll come back and we'll do our best to sort of take into account your feedback to come up with something that you all can support. I do not have a slide for every CIP. The first one that I have here has to do with the roadway vegetation management projects. We actually have 3 different ones in the budget. The one that I mentioned, the 2025, this is something we want to do this summer. It's focused on the west end of Donner Lake. It is town staff leading that in partnership with the Truckee Fire Protection District. And then we've got another one that's starting in 2027, which is in coordination with Nevada County, that would take care of a variety of roads along throughout the town. And then the third one is the one that we're partnering with the Tahoe Donner Association with, where we're providing funding and they're leading a project to do roadside vegetation management on some roads in the subdivision.
I do have one question.
I just want to highlight too that the project plan for this year, it's small, but it's really a pilot in terms of the partnership with the fire district and doing work on private land in conjunction with the town-owned property. So we're really trying to pilot that and see how that works. We have very narrow right-of-ways down at that end of the, do you have it up there?
Yeah,
Perfect.
that's the
There
next
we
one.
go.
So that's what it looks like. And it is, and to Jen's point, it's surprising how much staff time these projects can take because there's so much public outreach and conversations and individual conversations with the property owners. And so this partnership with the Truckee Fire Protection District, so that they're doing a lot of the outreach, I think could be a very good solution to that.
Mayor, may I?
Yes, please go ahead.
That's very helpful. I didn't realize this was kind of piloting this concept of, so it's not just the right-of-way. We're seeing if property owners are interested in removing more, and we would be in combination with the fire department paying for the cost for those removals.
Correct. We're
Okay.
so the concept that we're working with is The Fire Protection District will be doing a lot of the outreach with the property owners to see if they're interested, and if they are, then we'll have expand our scope of work of our project. And there's discussion about using some of the Measure T funds to help fund the on private property.
Right, so town would pay for the right-of-way, Measure T for the property ones. Okay. Because when I saw this in the slide deck ahead of time, it appeared that the purpose of this was to improve the evacuation routes. Is that one of the intentions of this, right?
Right. I mean, so these are all 3 main roads on the west end.
Right.
And they have the right of way that, I mean, some of the other roads in the west end are very narrow right of ways. And so the idea is that if you go in and just clear the right of way, you're not doing a whole lot. So if this works here, maybe this same model could work for some of these other roads.
For other areas, okay, because I was just going to say, it seems to me if we're looking at evacuations, we're missing the major one that goes out towards Coldstream, but that's intended for a future project, I'm assuming, based on the results of this kind of combination public-private.
I mean, I think our long-term goal is to go out there and do these projects and really do these larger projects to get the vegetation removed on almost all the roads in town. We've done a lot with our 2 previous projects that we had.
Well, I would just say at $100,000 investment, that's less than I'm ready to invest in this purpose. Obviously, that's been something that I feel really passionately about, in reducing fuels and wildfire risks and evacuation potential. Understanding that the staff impact, though, is very helpful, and if there's any way to augment that with, hiring back retired staff or things like that, I would support that effort, because $100,000 doesn't seem consistent with trying to get through what we're trying to get through in all of our major roads in town.
I'm sorry, it seems too little or too much?
It seems way too little. Like, how much did we spend on the last vegetation project that we did in Sierra Meadows and Glenshire?
Well, Tawadana was close to like $1 million, was 1.2.
Yeah. I would love to see this expanded. I understand there's staff constraints, but if there's creative ways to solve that roadblock, I would be supportive of it. See what my fellow council members would like to say.
Can I ask a couple follow-up questions on that?
Yes, and I just want to know, what do you mean by expand? Farther down the road or wider, or both?
Yeah, this is a very small area of the Donner Lake community, so I would like to expand it to more of to at least all the major roads in Donner Lake. If we're going to say we're going to take care of Donner Lake, let's take care of all of Donner Lake. Like we took care of all of Glenshire and Sierra Meadows and Tahoe Donner.
Those were great questions. I was also curious. So Tahoe Donner was about 1.2 million, but what about the other neighborhoods that we did roadside vegetation management in? Because we did Glenshire, we did some work in Prosser, but then I know we also kind of got stalled.
800,000.
I think Dan can jump in here.
Should we answer Councilmember Henderson's question? I was going to jump in with another piece of information relative to the West End.
Do you have the number? Nikki can look that up while we're answering.
Scott's signaling me. It's about 800,000.
And that was for just Glenshire?
That was for the Prosser, Glenshire, that whole project.
Yeah, Glenshire, Prosser, and Sierra Meadows.
Yes, thank you.
And then the year prior to that was all of Tahoe Donner.
And then my next follow-up question was, are there other, in addition to down by Donner Lake, are there other sort of outstanding needs, or what? Yes, there are. What are the other outstanding needs for roadside vegetation management within the town's boundaries?
Like Olympic Heights, the Gateway area, Armstrong Tract, and maybe some stuff out along Comstock, that area.
Okay.
Alder Road or?
Yeah, it's Alder, up by the middle school, that area.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then so I know we have a estimated set aside here of 100,000 for this particular project. for the county partnership roadside vegetation management, which I know won't be implemented until, I think you said 2027. Is that for, I know there were 17 and a half identified miles of roadways and 3.5 acres that needed treatment. Is that what we're talking about with that county partnership?
That was really, that when we scoped that with the county, that was really meant to take care of kind of the majority of the balance of the roads in town. And I don't know at this point, when it's time to actually do that work, we'd probably have to reassess and figure out if that was enough money or not. So it would be part of a much larger project undertaken by the county. So there would be some potentially savings in doing a larger project.
Sure. And there was a project that I just learned about at the Solid and Hazardous Waste Commission meeting last week from Ricky Martinez, who's down at the county. And it's a partnership with us and the county, apparently, to be implemented in some of the mobile home parks related to wildfire mitigation work. Is that included in this partnership, or is that something different?
It is not that I'm aware of. I'm not sure.
Might
James
be
might
giving
know
us-
about that.
This is hot off the press, guys.
It's breaking news.
And would it, I guess, if it's not included, is it going to be its own CIP because it's going to need staff time, or?
Yeah, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because you'll have an opportunity to hear from me. But I will mention, so there are some programs that we will be proposing for you to consider about a number of things. One, evacuation studies and analysis, and one of the benefits of that could help identify some priority areas for some of this vegetation management work. Another one is really looking into creating incentive programs for community members to be able to do some wildfire mitigation work at the parcel level. So a big part of that will be looking at some of the mobile home communities because they are very vulnerable to wildfire, the density of them and just how quickly they can burn and how hot they burn can be huge challenges we've seen time and time again. So we'll go into that a little bit more, but did I answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's wonderful. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I think last question, I promise. If we were to invest more in roadside management for 2025, so because we have all of these outstanding areas that Becky, you just talked about, do we have capacity, recognizing we often bring on contractors for this type of work? Could we invest more in our fuels reduction work? Because it's obviously one of the biggest threats to our community.
In terms of staff resources, I think we put together a project that we thought we could get done this summer, and we might build out a little bit, extend our road segment slightly, but I mean, this is sort of what we think we could do in coordination with the Truckee Fire Protection District and not much more, unless we swapped out some other projects, but they can be very time intensive again. So
I guess I'm trying to get to, is there a way to achieve more scale and impact if we invest more resources? And maybe the answer is no, because we simply don't have the capacity.
I think in terms of, I mean, from a financial perspective, we can trade things out and add dollars. That's less of the challenge. It's these projects are so intensive in terms of contact with each individual property owner. There's always a tree that is particularly adored, and there's a lot of conversations about. But then partnering with the fire district to go onto private land adds a whole nother layer of complication. So this was scaled to try to pilot that. And I don't think we were thinking this meant Donner Lake was done. I think we were envisioning this, is this the model to do the rest of the areas where we could really have a bigger impact in a future year?
And the Fire Protection District, they're already going onto private land. A third of Measure T funding has been dedicated towards projects for private landowners, the grants that they are doing. Is that what we're talking about, or that's different because that tends to be larger scale private landowners?
This would be, sorry for jumping in, this would be different in that the fire district would be taking the lead on contacting every single property owner, in this case along South Shore Drive, with notifying them of the opportunity to have vegetation work done kind of consistent with fire district recommendations, but with the property owner not having to coordinate the work because we as the town would be coordinating the work. But every one of those situations would mean there needs to be an agreement where that property owner signs a piece of paper and says, yes, it's okay to enter my property and to take these trees down. So that becomes very time consuming. And when I asked Danny for the microphone here, it was in response to one of the questions Councilmember Klofstad asked related to capacity. It's not only a town capacity conversation, it's also a fire district capacity conversation. The section of South Shore Drive that we're showing, because we think that's where the bulk of the communication would be needed, is what they felt they had capacity to take on as well. So I think even if we wanted to go expand into more streets in the West End, I think what the fire district would tell us is that they don't have the capacity to do that and try to bring those private properties into the mix as well. And then one of the things Becky had mentioned was the right-of-way width, which is basically the property that we own. And so we had some conversation earlier about a lot of property owners believe they own all the way to the edge of pavement. And that's what a lot of the communication and staff time investment is in the areas where that's not the case. In the west end of Donner Lake, in many instances, that is the case because the property lines are so old out there that we really can't do a meaningful project. You know, we can basically do work to the back of the ditch line, and then that's it. We can't go beyond that without being at risk of encroaching onto private property. So that's why this different model, in our opinion, if it can be successful, would be a really good way to go because we could do meaningful work out there. But it takes a much higher level of touch than even the earlier projects did.
Okay, I have other thoughts, but I can hold them. Otherwise, we're never going to get through all this stuff.
Yeah, I just think based on all of this, what I would really hope for is that this is successful and that we put a CIP in similar to this one for next year. We took a break, and I understand why we did that, but I feel like we need to have consistent plans to march this forward annually in order to get to where we need to get to. Otherwise, Glenshire and Sierra Meadows are going to be regrown before we finish everything else, and that's not really the benefit that we're looking for.
I think that's it. I mean, maybe there's a CIP we can consider for 2026 work, and maybe it's not this model, maybe it's not this pilot, but maybe it's reverting back to our old model if we still have to do Olympic Heights and Gateway and Armstrong, and also sort of what's the return on investment in terms of like how quickly can we do these projects, right? Does it make more sense to invest $800,000 and get Olympic, Gateway, and Armstrong all done in a summer the way that we did when we did Glenshire and Prosser, et cetera, as opposed to something much more smaller, recognizing also that, private landowners are ultimately responsible for their private land as well and do need to take ownership over that. So I guess my biggest concern I'll just end with is I don't feel like we're investing enough in roadside vegetation management. We need to scale it drastically. I realize there are capacity constraints. We have different partnerships. And it's not just about sort of the roadside vegetation management, right? The Fire Protection District has 15,000 acres that are highly prioritized for initial treatments. Now, not all of that is, town land we're talking about in the Fire Protection District. With the funding from Measure T and Airport District and other sources right now, they're only doing 500 acres a year. They have to get through 15,000 high prioritized acres, and there's 50,000 acres total that they have to do just for initial treatments, not even maintenance. So can we partner with them and invest more funding in some of these larger scale projects? Because it's not just fires along roads, right? It's fires around all of the lands that surround our town. I want to see us investing more and finding a way to be able to actually scale that.
Same.
I'm actually going to stop talking now, Mayor.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Oh, you should.
I just appreciate this pilot model and utilizing the Truckee Fire Protection District and their expertise. And I know living in Sierra Meadows, the amount of time and effort that I saw staff have with my neighbors because there was a lot of concerns. So utilizing, again, Truckee Fire Protection District, where I think people listen to firefighters differently than they might listen to town staff sometimes because of the different expertise. So I think this is a great model. I support moving forward with a pilot program. Excited to hear more from James about what data we'll be gathering that may help us inform larger projects moving forward. But I think probably every CIP project we heard today, we would all say, if we had more money and more staff, we'd love to do more. And I think we got to stick with what can we accomplish with our partners. So I'm excited to see how this works.
Yeah, I see this as a glass half full rather than half empty, and appreciate the problem and trying to staff up and then backing off. In a way, I move more towards the same idea as paving projects. Get a pattern going where you're going to cover so many miles of road every year and keep at it, doing the highest risk areas first, which is what I think we'd want to hit.
So I think we'll move into the next CIPs.
Yes.
I think we've heard feedback from 2 of you at least, and as we go into the other CIPs, particularly the ones that James will present from a recovery and planning perspective, you should be thinking about what you're willing, if there's consensus to reallocate funds to something bigger, what are you willing to give up for that? So we'll move on. And I think James's presentation will give you a more holistic approach from a wildfire perspective, so that will be important for you to hear as well. Okay, next.
Okay. Okay, new project. We think that the Measure V road maintenance tax, which is a 0.5% sales tax dedicated road maintenance, expires in 2028. We think there's an opportunity to potentially look at a ballot in 2026, and so we think it's important to start maybe doing some polling. So this project would allow that to occur late summer. So this is a new project. Guardrail replacement.
Is it just a renewal? Like we're really
Yes,
gonna?
yes, it's just a renewal.
We have to do polling because we're required to, or just because that's the way we've done everything and we are afraid to switch that?
We're not required to. We would do polling to gauge if there was to understand if there was going to be a big lift or not. If it was the right time to put it on, it's a little bit in advance.
How far in advance?
2 years.
And this is all outsourced anyway?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, just a question.
Guardrail project, already talked about this. We have a few guardrails in town that need to be replaced. Pretty low level of effort, but a new project. West River Street parking lot. There's just some information on this. We can come back to the slide if you want. I'm going to kind of go through these quickly because I think you are all familiar, and a lot of these projects have been in the budget for some time. Again, we talked about Trout Creek restoration projects. That's restoring the creek from Jibboom Street to roughly around School Street in downtown. I'm going to pause here for a second to see if Alfred wants to chime in on this project a little bit to expand the Public Service Center.
Sure. Thank you, Becky. So this is, can you guys hear me? This thing on? Okay. So this is to expand the Public Service Center up at Stevens Lane. Right now we have space within the northern portion of the existing, most recent constructed building. There's space in there for 4 vehicles right now that we have a spot for that's fairly permanent. We do store 3 vehicles outside under kind of a pole barn area. We also store Placer County vehicles over there as well. Those are stored out in the elements as well. So needless to say, we're already at capacity because we're also storing vehicles for our contractor for Tart Connect over at Riverview. So with the even with the replacement of electric vehicles, conversion from fossil fueled over to electric, that looks at essentially a 2-to-1 replacement ratio as well, just based on range. So looking at our future needs, we were made available some SB 125 dollars 2 years ago, which came out of the TIRCIP program, which is the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program. This came in the form of an allocation both to the NCTC, Nevada County Transportation Commission, to allocate both to us and Nevada County itself. So we split those dollars. It was about a $12 million pot. So $6 million of that came to this program, and this project. And then recently, we were able to free up about $3 million. Was that the paving and drainage project? Because we were eligible for local public partnership program dollars through the state, because we passed Measure U, Measure R renewal. So that gave us an incentive dollars of $3 million. So we moved those dollars over to the Public Service Center dollars. So that's the $9 million that you see. So $6 million of that is the $125, the SB $125. The other $3 million in change, and just change in general, came from the LPP dollars that were made available to us through incentive programming as well. So that's the dollar figure that you see. This is a very planning level estimate right now. We haven't really proceeded with the preliminary design on any of this yet. We did do some footprint kind of layout over the last year, looking at the area to the north of the existing building. So the area that we're looking at is from north of the existing building between that and I-80 area. So that's all within the town land. So we would look to subdivide that also to kind of pull that out of the larger parcel, because we would want to pursue federal dollars also. And if we pursue federal dollars, we don't want to federalize the whole site, because that would federalize everything that's existing there and make it subjected to the 40-year federal investment is what they look at. So we would pull that out. And then look at those building to the north there, and looking at approximately about a 20,000 square foot building in that area that would meet both of our existing and future transit needs, including operations for day-to-day staff, administrative space that currently does exist in the northern building that we have right now, but make that replaced in kind with a new building. And access would come around most likely from right behind the animal shelter, and then back towards that area where the existing building is, and have dedicated access. As Becky mentioned, there's conflicts within those areas, whether it's a secure site, the fact that we're both operating essentially very close to 24-hour services, if you will. So there's a lot of conflict that goes along there, and just really just to have dedicated space both for our existing transit operations as well as what our future needs are based on our short-range transit plan that was adopted a couple of months ago.
So this would be all interior parking is what we're looking at, is covered parking and conditioned?
Yeah, it would be a fully enclosed climate-controlled building. We would look to have our electric charging infrastructure in there as well.
Inside.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And that 9 million is basically transit required dollars. Like, it's not coming from the general fund. You basically have already secured 9 million. No, she's saying no. You're saying yes.
Yes. Yes, the
6 plus 3. I was going off the 6 plus 3.
Yes, to the NCTC, and then the 3 million we would exchange, which has been proposed in the budget. Exchange that 3 million that was in the paving and drainage project over to this, so they all would be in hand. Sorry, it is.
And so it
is confusing.
It's not general fund at the end
No.
of the day, really. It would have to go to something in that arena.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
I forgot the 3 million was money that comes to us because we helped ourselves with passing Measure E. So it's a kind of an add-on benefit of Measure E.
Thank you, community.
Yes. We leverage that very quickly.
We're going to keep moving quickly through these because you have a lot to get through still.
Yeah, so I'll take this next one real quick. The active transportation plan. So we've obviously heard this is a priority as well. So we have budgeted money for that. We are pursuing a grant through Sustainable Communities Program. We won't know about that until probably July or August of this coming fiscal year. So right now this is budgeted with general fund, correct? 100% of that to get this going over the next couple of months. Should this be approved with the budget, what we would look to accomplish over the next fiscal year is the consultant procurement. I know it's not a sexy milestone, but it is definitely one that needs to occur and does take some time. Existing conditions report, and then we would look at forming the stakeholder committee. A lot of the upfront work will be existing conditions. That is a lot of the meat of the potatoes of the plan, and I think that's a lot of what the community and council is desiring about what's going on out there, what are our users, what are our accident rates, those types of things, and that would be accomplished through the next fiscal year. And some of that data is seasonal dependent also, but when they can collect that data, so that'll also drive the schedule as well.
Okay, we'll keep moving on. Please.
Chibham Street sidewalk feasibility study. This is to do sidewalk or pedestrian bicycle improvements along Chibham Street from Bridge Street up to the Stone Ridge development. Again, this is one that we're proposing to start up in 2027. We've done some work on it and paused it, so not reinitiating it until then. One of the reasons too is that we're kind of delayed this one is we're working on the Trout Creek project, and part of that is to replace the bridge on Jaboom, which can really would tie in to a wider bridge, would tie into improvements on Jaboom, this project. So there's some thought process of get the design for the Jaboom Street Bridge replacement done and then tie it into this project.
Before you move on that, I read this first sentence multiple times, and can you just explain to me specifically what does initial work has been completed to prepare a study to evaluate potential pedestrian? What specifically are we talking about there?
We were just throwing a bunch of words in there trying to confuse you all. We did an initial analysis. We collected traffic data. We collected pedestrian and bicycle data. We put together preliminary conceptual plans and cost estimates and have a pretty good sense of what type of improvements would be needed for a variety of options. And so then we paused. So that's what we've done.
Thank you.
And why? I guess I'm confused. Like why we wouldn't be designing Jaboom Street and the new bridge holistically together and doing one project versus, I mean, if you're ripping out the bridge, you're closing down Jaboom Street, you're doing improvements at that intersection. Obviously, why are we not either doing that all together, or again, when we come back for discussion, doing the other side of it together? But like, what really? We're going to spend $5 million to repair that one little tiny portion of creek, of which like $500,000 of that was our actual Lahontan penalty. Like, I know we can talk about this publicly now, right? Can I say that?
Yeah, yeah.
How much is the Lahontan fine?
It was
So we're spending $4 million to make up $390,000, right? And that's one of our priority choices that we can talk about at the end of this conversation. I'd like to talk about that, just to make sure we have that noted. But we're not going to do these together. That was my first question, was why we're not talking about, at the very minimum, that intersection.
So the initial work that we're doing right now for the Trout Creek project is going to get us to like 65% design. Once we kind of get to that, there's a question of whether or not we're going to phase that project or not. What's in the budget right now is the full project. To meet the Lahontan requirements, we could do a very short section, which would just be east of School Street. I think what would likely happen is that project would kind of get to 65% design, maybe sometime next year. And then we would sort of pause and look for funding and see if we can fund the whole thing. It makes a lot more sense to do the whole thing at once, but it's a very expensive project. That short section is a little bit more feasible. So potentially, if that project does pause and we're looking for funding, the Jaboom Street could, move forward. And I do think that each project should be considering the ultimate design of the other, which is a good thing because we do have a conceptual design, so we generally know what our options are for this project.
With a nice level of confidence.
In terms of the Jaboom Street?
Yeah, of having no regrets later that they were done in series instead of collectively, altogether, right. The way Councilmember Pallavi was talking about.
Yeah, I think the big issue that the council is going to face on that Jaboom Street sidewalk project is it's whether or not to change the circulation pattern in downtown Truckee, because that's a very tight corridor, as you all know. You've got two basic options. One is to do a massive may not be the right term, but a very significant retaining wall widening project of the whole corridor to maintain two travel lanes in each direction, one up the hill, one down the hill, and then add sidewalks on one side or the other. which would be a lot more expensive than turning the street into a one-way street and using one of the travel lanes as the future sidewalk footprint, which would be a much less costly project, but it would also modify the circulation pattern in downtown, which I think would trigger a more broad community conversation, which is what starts to take more time than just hire the consultant and go, tack the sidewalk onto the end of the edge of the street. So I think that's one of the reasons this thing's kind of been moving in spits and furts.
And so that, I think that's one of the reasons there's at least 2 council members that would like to move forward and start getting these questions answered, realizing what a challenge it is.
To Councilmember Pallavi's point, this was the same conversation you were in last year. And
yes.
I think our response is we haven't found a great solution to move it forward unless you're willing to tell us what else to deprioritize.
Right. Right. It's deja vu.
Let's move on to
Yes.
the next CIP.
I'm gonna give this to Alfred. It's a quick one though.
Slammed in there. So this is not a CIP project, but based on our conversations last council meeting, we kind of prefaced that we would have this discussion as part of the budget discussion. And we walked through scenarios last time about budget expenditures as well as what the level of service would equate to looking to the next year. We laid out a scenario that would be that middle column that we would budget the same amount as we had this current fiscal year. However, that would result in a reduction in the level of service based on increased cost related to insurance, fuel, and then also maintenance and upkeep of the new mobility hub coming online. What we have highlighted here is that what you would see and will see in the upcoming operations budget is that we have budgeted for the full amount to maintain the level of service for next year, which is commensurate with the level of service it is right now. I know Mayor Zabriskie had asked about some ridership numbers for the beginning and the endings of the days, whether we could save, that was one of the scenarios that I did throw out there, whether we could save some dollars and costs based on shrinking the level of service during certain times of day. We really see the service utilized very consistently throughout the day, especially when it does come online at 6:30. We see about 7 to 8 riders just within that half hour. Our performance standard for passengers per hour, about 5 to 6 passengers per hour, which is also what we see on our fixed route service too. So we are seeing that high level of demand in the morning, and we also seeing it throughout into the evening to midnight hour at still about 5 to 8 people at that time. Another thing to consider is if you start those services later or in them earlier, you're going to lose some of those riders that now cannot make that return trip also, that are trying to go to work, that now say, well, I can't get home at 11 o'clock now, or I can't get home at midnight, so I can't take it at 8 o'clock for my shift to start. So those are some things just to consider. There's really not a lot of cost savings. We would lose a lot of ridership, I bet, based on just saving a few tens of thousands of dollars. Not that that's not a big deal, but it does affect the quality of the service and the utilization of the service. So we have budgeted to continue the service as that it's been utilized within the community over the last couple of years, where I think we have found a very good sweet spot about meeting the needs of our commuters, our workers, our children in the community, as well as our visitors as well.
Is there any update on partnership funding?
So I'll jump in here. That did come up in the last conversation when Alfred gave his presentation. We did not and have not asked VTT or the hospital to continue their funding. We felt like that was part of the Measure E intention. If council would like us to do that, you can give us that direction and we will go do that. There could be other opportunities to maybe expand service within the region using those partnership fundings, but we haven't had an opportunity to engage in those conversations.
I'd be interested in hearing from my fellow council members on that. I think we do have some really good numbers on who this is serving and the areas, the concentration of areas. So I think there is a conversation that needs to be had about partner participation in that, since it is serving their customer needs.
Yeah, I mean, did you want to jump in? I would say yes, I agree with you. I mean, we just passed a new sales tax measure in the fall that's going to generate roughly $3.5 million a year. And almost all of that is then going to go immediately to this. And there won't be space for any of the other things that we committed to the community that those sales tax dollars would also be used for. So I would really like to see more partnership in this. We did get data, for example, on, our middle school youth using the service to get to school when the school district didn't have enough buses. So should the school district, can they step in and be a partner in this? The hospital obviously has been, but I do wonder if there's more opportunity. Although I also sort of feel like we kind of keep asking this question every time this comes forward. And I'm not sure what the sticking point is. If it's the partner agencies just don't want to engage in this conversation, like why aren't we able to make any headway in this?
I think we have. I mean, we have asked every year, and every year the hospital and VTT have stepped up to it. So I think we felt like we were making headway. We didn't get clear
Maybe I
counsel.
shouldn't have said no headway. Sorry,
Yeah.
more headway maybe.
Well, we didn't get council direction to do that based on the presentation, and that wasn't the intention of the presentation. Staff interpreted Measure E as being the town's commitment to fund TARC Connect, and I think our expectation is at least VTT wasn't planning to fund it beyond that because they had some other priorities. Councilmember Pallavi might be able to speak to that. We can certainly go back and ask the hospital and the school district. The hospital has a new CEO, so it might take a little bit more time for just that conversation. She's drinking from a fire hose at the moment. We all know that. And then just recognizing that it's not a simple, knock on the door and ask, because then, Alfred has to go and give the data and the presentation. So there's some staff resources that are devoted to kind of passing that hat around. And if that's a priority for the council, we can do that. But
Councilmember Romack, did you have something?
Yeah, I would be comfortable. We passed Measure E. It was in the language that it was to support transit service. So moving forward with utilizing Measure E, I think we already saw funding for an additional emergency operations position from Measure E. So I think staff is doing a good job in looking to utilize the additional funding. I feel like it is a lot of staff time to go and ask for these dollars, and so it seems to be easier to just move forward with the money we have. And I would say if there are other opportunities to utilize funding from VTT or the hospital outside of TARC Connect, I know there's talk about the airport shuttle and funding for that. And is that a better utilization of VTT's resources? So maybe we're not losing them contributing to some of our town programs, but maybe it's just other opportunities that would fit better. So I would be more comfortable just moving forward with Measure E funding to fund the $2.9 million to maintain current levels of service.
Yeah, I see some value in this conversation we're having right now. I agree with Councilmember Romack. I also appreciate the remark about staff time being required. But I think from the experience Councilmember Romack and I have had on the TMA, this would really be part of a larger conversation about providing transportation for the 1,000+ employees the hospital has, and our microtransit is only one part of that. Could be their van pools and everything else, and we have a community-wide interest in simply getting these people out of their private cars onto public transportation or van pooling, and I think that's how we'd want to approach it. And maybe we do end up extracting more dollars from the hospital because they are benefiting from our micro transit and maybe not taking advantage of van pools like they should.
Just a quick chime in for me. I mean, I think our dollars will be better spent if we can have a more efficient and higher level of service from a ridership perspective. And so the goal isn't to squeeze more dollars to offset the town's costs. The goal should be, how do we increase the ridership to a point that more people are benefiting it and utilizing it, and it's truly a constituent benefit to our community that is being served by these sales tax dollars at this really high level. So I look at it fairly differently, I think, than some of the opinions that have been expressed so far. I can tell you Visit Truckee Tahoe is not going to come in for operational support. It was very clear when that pitch was made. These are pilot projects. You're not going to be expected for long-term ongoing support. VTT's been super clear with the town every single step of the way that we weren't, VTT wasn't going to be providing ongoing support. And I would say back, what VTT did offer was marketing support, which gets to my point of how do we increase ridership? How do we make the service better and more efficient and serving more people, A, and B, to Councilmember Romac's statement, how do we link it better? How do we have it serve a broader both geographic region and audience at the same time? So I would just leave it there. Like this is for actual operations. And I would say, I think we were clear. We weren't as explicit as I would have liked to be in the ballot language either. And I hear you loud and clear. I really wanted us to say, hey, we're using this for TART Connect. And we didn't, we went with all the other fluffy words, and so be it. And here we are. So I'm comfortable with moving forward with this slide in the way that it is constructed and looking for other opportunities, that I think support other meaningful things. Like the hospital doesn't need to support Truckee TART Connect. They need to be supporting exactly what you were talking about, Mayor. They need to support their buses coming from Reno better, right? And then they can get into town, and hospital employees can then use TART Connect to go do some of their whatever they're doing at their lunch break. So that would be
Everyone ready to move on? Staff? Where are we?
Truckee Dirt Trail Program. It's a new project. There's actually an item on the agenda tonight, and I think you all know what this is. Parking district. Was there a question that you were supposed? Did you want to talk about this one?
Lindsay, sorry, Councilmember Romack.
I had a question, and sorry, this is in the conversations around that was brought up earlier about Donner Lake, and then just being aware of some of the work that's been done in Placer County around beach parking and whatnot. Just curious, I don't believe this is solely to just continue to look at downtown parking, right, and not to be looking at potential opportunities at Donner Lake or other areas where we might want to do parking management.
That is correct. This is just focused on the district downtown. But this infrastructure that we're building and the technology and all the software does give us the ability to be more dynamic when it looks at other commercial areas, more residential areas, as well as recreation areas. So it doesn't preclude that by any means, but policy-wise, that this is just focused on the parking district downtown.
And I would totally understand staff probably has zero capacity to expand and look at other areas. But that's good to hear, Alfred, that this technology could be utilized and would be something for us to be thinking about in the future. I know we've heard from, again, Donner Lake residents of parking on shoulders and all the challenges they have there. So is that something in the future to look to some sort of parking management district, paid parking in the Donner Lake area? So just putting that out there again to think about for the future.
Yeah, and to me, that would go into what we are receiving public comment about. It's not just about speeding. It's about roadway management, right? And it's talking about the entire roadway as one entity, not just one little piece of it. So that's where I would, probably up the request, but still bike rack it at the end of the day when we get there.
And then that folds into our other commitments with Measure E, which was, environmental protection, and it goes into the erosion management around Donner Lake. So it all kind of folds into that. I would love to see some Measure E funds go towards that, because I think it would really help and enhance the protection of Donner Lake. And the other area where we kind of flipped past it real quickly, but in the active transportation management plan, I think that's another area where we're not creating new CIPs, but maybe we're looking at them a little differently. Like if we look at this one a little bit differently and we try to include Donner Lake, or at least a plan for a future expansion to Donner Lake, same with the active transportation CIP, that really should be looking at this precise issue that was brought up in public comment. around Donner Lake, and what else could we be doing? What other traffic calming elements could be considered as part of the trails program? So those, to me, they both of those can be in service to this greater concern that's been brought up without changing the dynamic of what the intention of these things are.
And one more for me. Just on this, and I know we haven't seen the work plan yet, but will the work plan include an evaluation of the parking district or no, as a heads up? This is going to be like step one in parking districts.
Yes, I mean, our parking plan was developed and adopted, I think, in 2019, right before COVID. So we're essentially just now implementing the parking management plan. So with the LPR information, we can get the license plate reader technology, better software technology in terms of permitting. We can really kind of reset the baseline because it was never set.
Okay.
And what we are seeing through all of our new technology and pay by text and pay by app, and even upgrading our meters where they all work now. And we even have work orders that print off every day. Now they go to our parking techs. They don't have to go look at every meter and see if it's working. It tells them what meter's not working, what the deficiencies are. That we've seen our revenue and our
data
compliance
will
come
help
up.
once we implement this.
Yeah.
Start to collect data over a year, whatever. Then we can start to look at actually what's happening.
Correct.
Right now, we'd be flying blind.
Yes, correct. Now we're just kind of looking at what our budgets are and revenues have been. You know, what are we collecting versus citations versus meters and everything. But now we can look at our performance measures that were laid out in the parking management plan now that we've implemented some of our near-term recommendations and see how those are performing.
Very much so looking forward to that because, of course, that plan was also pre-TART Connect. And now we have this issue of a very successful program that has nowhere to pick up and drop off its passengers in the downtown corridor. We really need to figure out a way to manage that better because that too is creating traffic congestion and challenge
Every
and public
day,
safety
10 times a day, the middle of Jaboom Street. Like the middle. Not on the side, like the middle.
Correct.
Just TART Connect van all day long.
And having the mobility hubs also come online, so there's another existing condition that's changed down there also. So there is a lot of different things that have happened, great things that need to be kind of re-looked at and recalibrated.
I just have people expressing appreciation because the parking meter doesn't work.
You're not supposed to say that out loud.
They work now.
100%.
Or that we're understaffed in the parking district.
Okay, let's keep moving forward.
Moving
I'm going
along.
to wrap this up with just letting you know there's a couple projects that have been removed. There was a West River Street Park Frontage Improvement Project that got removed because it got combined with another one. We took out our seal coat projects on the trails. We found that we're not really getting as much benefit out of those and they're disruptive to the trail users. So we're going to focus on crack management and overlays more frequently instead. So that just want to let you know that. And I think with that, that kind of wraps up our CIPs. And I know we said we go back to that other slide, but we're kind of wondering if maybe it might be useful to get all the CIPs in front of you and then come back.
Well, and part of that is I think it's important to hear at least the emergency management CIPs that James is going to present to give you some context, and then revisiting roadside vegetation in that context as well. So maybe we have one slide for community development, and then we have economic vitality, and then we're in emergency preparedness recovery. So if we could get through those.
Can we just talk about roadways really quick? The roadways piece of it.
Yes.
Because I don't, not the roadside management roadways, like the other CIP roadways.
Okay.
Yeah. Like the Jaboom Street.
Go ahead. I
and
don't
Church
quite know
Street.
what you want to talk about, but
I just want to talk about, so I guess what I really wanted to say was, that was the first time, and, we haven't seen the Baker-Tilly report, but what you said at the beginning of this session was the first time any of us have probably heard that statement. We can't continue to fund public infrastructure CIPs at the rate that we have over the past whatever number of years, 30 years, unless we're willing to have a conversation about other dollars, right? Has anybody else heard that statement in your time up on the dais?
I don't quite understand what you're saying, but I'd just say move ahead and get to your point.
What I'm saying is that I think I don't necessarily agree with that, and I would be willing to have conversations about other areas of the budget in order to continue to make the roadway improvements that we've been talking about that have been long distance off the book CIPs for the 6 years that I've been up here that haven't been started, that, continually. If we went back to my first budget, I bet you that Boom Street budget had started in 2022, right? Now it's going to start in 2027 or 2028. So I'm wondering when we start having that conversation about what does that look like and how do we have that conversation in a meaningful way, if that's even an important conversation to a majority of the council members in terms of what other roadway improvements are we going to see? Because if we're not starting some of those projects till 2027, we're not implementing them till 2035 at this rate, right? So if that's okay with everybody, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to fight with everybody, but that's not okay with me. I would continually, I will stick to the same exact thing that Mayor, you and I spoke about last year, which is the rate at which we're doing some of them, I think, deserve to be heightened and accelerated and prioritized. And if there are cuts that need to be made, I'm willing to have that conversation about what cuts that need to be made. I don't believe I've been given that opportunity, and I don't think the rest of you have either, is all I'm saying.
I'm sorry. I think that's what we're going to do once we get through these other CIPs.
Yeah, but I think they're all coming from different places. They're coming from different people and places. Like, what I'm talking about is very specifically like what Scott and Jessica do. Like, on the like if you go back to the slide, it's the lefternmost slide on our screen. It was simply roadway. They're not. It was basically like, yeah, that left side there. Like, to me, I don't remember. I guess the point that I was trying to make was, like, I don't remember saying in a single meeting, these were my 4 CIP priorities for roadways, ever. And so I'm just wondering, like, they're great. You've roadway vegetation management, those are $100,000 projects, like, no big deal. But I want to see some of the bigger stuff moving forward, and I don't think we have the capacity to do it. And so what I was just told by our town manager was, great, you got to slow down CIPs because we're spending all this money on housing and sustainability and roadway management and emergency services. Okay, so I'm saying, like, I want to have that bigger conversation of what the buckets are so that I can sit up here and say, look, I fought really hard to get you another senior engineer. I'm trying to accelerate the CIP projects that I've been sitting up here and listening to and haven't made a single bit of progress on in all that time. And does anybody else want to have those conversations, or are you all fine with the way it is? And that's okay.
Let's go to Councilmember Henderson, and I hope we get to the conversation you're asking for a little bit later in this meeting.
I don't need to add in now, actually. Thank you, though.
Okay.
Although I would request we do a 5-minute washroom break soon.
Yeah, it's been almost 2 hours, 2 minutes short of 2 hours.
Maybe
Go ahead.
right before you take your break, I can just offer, because I think Councilmember Pallavi, that you're right, that we haven't delved into that. We've talked a lot about you'll have choices, and in the past few years, you haven't had to make a lot of difficult choices. But what's come up in the last few years, even before I was here, is you weren't doing roadside vegetation projects that, well, even if they aren't dollar intensive, they're staff intensive, right? So I know you understand that, but I think for the community to hear, there's been a lot of things that have popped up through the course of the last few years that have taken substantial resources. And maybe part of the conversation is, are we not wanting to be that flexible with those kind of new projects and just kind of stay the course so that you're not being frustrated that a project that was proposed 6 years ago is still not starting, right? Like, that's kind of part of your conversation, I think.
Councilmember Romack, and then we'll take a break.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think, staff capacity money capacity and community capacity is the other piece we also always want to keep in mind. And I know, again, I said it before, we'd all love to see all of this move forward really quickly, but we have invested a lot of money, and West River Street Streetscape project was just a huge undertaking. And I know we heard there was a lot of business impacts and frustration from the community of traffic impacts. And so also keeping in mind, like, we can't just have a new infrastructure project close to another one every year too, because there also needs to be some time for the community to get used to the new way of things. So I think that's an important piece too. And I know we're all kind of thinking about that, but that's why we also just can't do all of these at once either. That would be too much on everyone.
Yeah, totally. And I think you guys all know I understand all that. I'm not trying to say not, but we're taking a year. We're probably going to take 2 years off from summer construction downtown just right now. Like, we're looking at 2 years off. So in my opinion, okay, we're going to get Bridge Street. Like, we should be planning those construction impacts every 2 years as we move that through. Like, yeah, give them a break, but keep it moving. And I guess what I saw in that roadmap was just not a lot of capital improvement focus on roadways specifically.
Okay. Speaking of break, let's take one. Back in business. We all, Rory back there? Okay.
So we're going to go into the planning CIPs next. Danielle's going to present those, and then Krista will go into economic vitality.
Thanks, Jen. Planning, unlike engineering, doesn't have a substantial amount of CIPs to present tonight, in part because we will spend the majority of our time working on the housing element update. And then when we're done with that, we will work on the rezoning that will result out of that housing element update. So that really is our priority. And we're working with Ascent right now for their scope of work. So we should get that within the next probably couple of weeks to have that as a future agenda item for council. And then we do have a CIP for ongoing general plan implementation. And that's a little bit fluid just depending on how the work program shakes out. So we can use it to do additional consulting services for our rezones. We can use it for our priority general plan implementation action items that we have. So that could include reviewing the development code for amendments to address wildfire mitigation, things like no net loss of housing in downtown. There's, any list of those. So it kind of also depends on what rises to the top with the council's priorities. But we did want to have that in there as a CIP specifically to keep having that flexibility based on our workload. And then we have sort of the future ones. So you'll see we've kind of pushed out the Hilltop Master Plan update. We had that already in last year's, but we won't likely get to that. And then we've modified what was previously called housing on public land, which is the C2013. We're modifying that to call it public-private partnerships for housing, in part because as we're learning and getting into some of these discussions about housing opportunities, we felt like we're kind of moving more in this direction of public-private partnerships. So we wanted to broaden out that CIP to not just be specific to only town-owned land, that maybe we can have opportunities for other conversations through that CIP. And that's kind of fluid too. I mean, some of that we have still under the American Rescue Plan Act funding, and then some of it with general fund dollars. And then also the biological and water resources plan. So we have that sort of as a placeholder, and then our ongoing wood stove rebate program. So again, we don't have that many, but in part because the housing element will take the priority. As far as we know, it's been taking HCD about a year to get through the review process, which is kind of daunting. So we want to be as early in as we can in front of them so that we don't face sort of the back end penalties that happen when you don't have an adopted housing element. That's
Danielle, quick question on the public-private partnerships. I know the public has been us, but we have other agencies that potentially could build housing, like the hospital district, school district, PUD. So would that be something that we would be supporting those other agencies in doing, or is this just for town-owned properties?
I think this is just sort of an evolution. So the way that we had it structured previously with last year's budget process was very specific to only town-owned properties. And I think as we are kind of watching what's happening with the housing market, sort of the economy, that felt too restrictive. So we opened it up just to make it a little more generic in terms. And I think that's just to be open to opportunity, whether that's with other agencies or with truly the development community, so that we've got some potential to work in different ways than we have in the past.
Great, thank you.
And there's a little bit of overlap. As a reminder, we're a member of the JPA, the Workforce Housing JPA. So like the school district, for example, is pursuing housing on school district property, and we would be supporting that effort as a JPA member, but there might be some other components that could come in under this as well, just as an example. I think one of our biggest takeaways from Edmund's Loft so far is, the town does not own a lot of land, so we don't have a lot of land that we already own, and probably it's not the most efficient to go out and buy land to then have to surplus to go out into another partnership. So if a property owner were to approach the town wanting to enter into a partnership similar to Edmund's Loft, but they already own the land, that might be a more efficient model.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. I have a few, though. There's no dates on these, but aren't there dates in the general plan for these items?
There's short-term, midterm, long-term, and you will get the dates with the next budget presentation. You'll have more information.
Okay, and then you said Ascent is who we're contracting with?
That's what we're going to propose for council to consider because they did do the general plan and they also did our last housing element, and they can be the most efficient to help us since they're already familiar with both of our documents.
And then on the Hilltop Master Plan update, I know it's an old plan. Is there anything specific about why we would be doing an update?
That's really to drive housing priorities because what we've found over time is that the property owners have really struggled to come together to put the plan in action. And so from our perspective, the best way to help facilitate housing in Hilltop is probably to rework the plan so that maybe we can make it easier for individual parcels to develop with some, reasonable infrastructure to support it. But the way that it's worded right now, it's going to stay stagnant, I think, until we can come up with some other alternatives.
Okay, and then finally, what did we used to call C2013, the public-private partnership?
I think it was housing on town-owned land.
Housing on town-owned land.
Townland. Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions. Any other questions? None. Okay, let's move along.
Mayor, council members, economic vitality CIPs include River Revitalization Action Plan as well as the Economic Development Strategic Plan. So the River Revitalization Action Plan is also known lovingly as R2SC. And we are proposing a budget of $175,000 to continue our ongoing efforts of both CALIS projects that you've heard of recently, as well as wrapping up the work towards an action plan that is currently in draft form. And then the Economic Development Strategic Plan is specifically called for in the general plan. The year is 2025. For those who saw that question or if someone asked that, it's 2025 that the general plan calls for this to be conducted by. And so we are proposing doing that in the next fiscal year. And we have a placeholder budget for this moment of $50,000, planning to work with a consultant on getting that done. And that's all.
How much of your time goes to this project? What percentage?
R2SC. Roughly speaking, just anecdotally, I would guess 70% or more.
And then over the future, do you think it'll decrease or?
Absolutely. Once there is no longer monthly meetings, if we're just supporting if we have an action plan and we're just no longer doing monthly meetings, working towards CALIS projects, that would be much less of my time would be needed. I would just.
Thank you. Those are all my questions. Okay, moving on.
We received a public comment from Chamber. They'll be part of this economic development strategy. Thank you.
Okay, we'll invite James to come up and present on emergency preparedness and mitigation and recovery. Thanks, Krista.
I think I'll go ahead and start it off since it's the police department side of it. So we have 6 CIPs that are annual and ongoing with a 7th with a new initiation here. So the first one is the fencing and security project. This was brought to you last year and we're currently in the design phase of this project. This is also in partnership with the airport district. With the recycling stations that are in the rear of this property, they have had some situations to where debris is blowing from those dumpsters into the airfield, which is causing some challenges for them. So we are partnering with the airport district and splitting the cost on that north fencing project. The total project cost is estimated to be just over $1 million, with $515 coming from our CIRA insurance provider. So those funds are designated for safety and security of town employees. And so that's half the cost with that fund there. And also, to house our EV fleet, eventually to have charging stations back there with, personal vehicles and patrol cars. The next one is the one that you've also heard before, is the radio equipment upgrade that we did receive some federal funding for. This project is about 65% complete. We received the radio equipment, and we still are on track to go live this fall in partnership with Nevada County Sheriff's Office. Once again, this is to standardize radio communications, not only in the region, but across the state, part of the emergency preparedness side of things. And then this is the annual ongoing one, the C1203, which is our in-car computers, as well as our body cameras and storage of those devices, TASER associated equipment, and our Flock license plate reader program that we currently have in place. So total for that CIP is $95,000. COPS grant will cover $15,000 of that, with general fund about $80,000.
Now, good evening or good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Moving over to the Office of Emergency Services projects within the Police Department. First, disaster preparedness. And so this is really broken down into 4 separate segments. First is improving community readiness resources. That's likely going to include the production of mailers, useful mailers that can be sent out to both households and business communities, sharing helpful preparedness resources. We have some ideas, but doing a little bit more R&D on the most effective resources to send out to community members. The next is really what we kind of mentioned before, the community wildfire mitigation resources. And that's a 2-phased approach. And the first is to really take a look at some of the town codes and ordinances and improve alignment with the wildfire hazards that we face. A lot of that will be, as Danielle had mentioned, help within the planning department as well, but bringing in contracted support to get that work done. The second, and I wouldn't say totally second, because we would want to start exploring this program as soon as feasible, but we'd want to first align all the codes to make sure that the recommendations for a incentive program for mitigation is really aligned with the town codes, and really is to take a look at what are some meaningful larger scale projects that people can do on the parcel level for wildfire mitigation. And so Measure T helps support a lot of projects through the fire district. I believe they're upping the amount of a match that they provide to people doing projects up to, I think right now it might be 500, it might be a little bit off, and I think they're exploring going up to 1,000 or 2,000. I'm not sure if they've made a final decision on that, but this could really support some of the larger, more expensive projects that might be associated with defensible space zone 0, replacing fences, which can be a costly endeavor for people with non-combustible materials. The next one, Emergency Operations Center room improvements. We're in the middle of utilizing grant dollars to upgrade a lot of the technology in our EOC. This is just some of the remaining punch list items to really make that room much more capable, kind of the non-high-tech additions to that room and design. And the last one is a defensible space improvement project within for Town Hall to help protect some of our critical infrastructure here. And so that is being identified as an unfunded grant source. There are a lot of grant funding opportunities within the state and locally for mitigation work that we can explore to try to tap into to help improve the defense of Town Hall. And so I know that will be a very public project. We'll have a lot of input if we move forward with that to make sure that we do this thoughtfully and without totally changing, the character of Town Hall.
Can we ask a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
On the slide? Yeah. So the community wildfire mitigation resources, those are really just developing or looking at the ordinances and then developing a parcel level incentive that's not to fund the incentives, correct?
We in year one next year, no, we're not asking for any funding to fund incentive programs, no. And so, but what we are looking into in the out years is funding to help support potentially some of those incentive projects. A lot more work needs to be done to really land on exactly how much would be useful. What are those projects that are really going to be recommended? What's the scale of that? Like, say, if the recommendation was replacing roofs, which fortunately there aren't a whole lot of wood shake roofs left in town. However, if that was one of the recommendations, a lot more costly than a fence, and you couldn't scale that quite as much. And so before we recommend dollar amounts towards that, there's a lot more front end work that would need to be done.
Great, thank you. I just wanted that clarity. So it's primarily planning.
Correct. Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, moving on to emergency planning. And so the first part of that we mentioned before, emergency evacuation analysis. And similar to what was done on the western side of Nevada County, led by the Office of Emergency Services, there were some studies for some unincorporated areas within Nevada County on the west side to really identify ways that they can meaningfully improve evacuation, both also with the ingress of emergency vehicles and egress of people in those zones. And so looking to do that town-wide. The only exception caveat to that is that the council, you have approved the use of TSSA 1 funds that I'll talk about in just a moment with Tahoe Donner to do their own study. We're working closely with them to make sure the scope of that project is very much aligned with what this would look like as well if council gave approval to move forward with this. And another portion of that is really to enhance our evacuation plans. We have a final draft that's being circulated among our partner agencies for support of an evacuation plan, which will be an annex to our emergency operations plan. And so that's essentially done. There's a quick image there that you can see for the evacuation management zones. And so essentially what that is taking the evacuation zones that have been developed through Genesis, formerly Zone Haven, and building upon those. And so with evacuations, it's always a challenge whether you're evacuating one zone or two zones, definitely a challenge. But where you see the true challenges are larger scale evacuations. And so the intent of this approach is to build off those smaller zones into larger evacuation management zones and really take a look at what does an evacuation look like for these areas. And having an analysis done with those zones, with the support of some of the software that we already use, with Ladris, really help bolster that evacuation plan and make it much more of a useful document. The next portion is recovery planning. And as unfortunately what we've seen throughout not only the California but the Western United States is that recovery from wildfires is extremely challenging for a couple of reasons. One, it's just the process on standing up your community again after you undergo such a traumatic event. The next part that's really challenging is dealing with the physical debris that's caused from a wildfire. And so it takes a lot of planning to get that done. There's a lot of great lessons learned that organizations have had, and having both a recovery plan to help create that guide on how to navigate the process with the state and federal and nonprofit programs that might be available, but also developing plans on how to manage the debris. Where are you going to store it temporarily? Where is it ultimately going to go? How are you going to track it? How do you make sure that you're keeping in line with all the environmental regulations that go with it to make sure that you're not foregoing funding reimbursement opportunities through both the state and federal government. And then another really important part of that recovery planning is the development of a roadmap to recovery, and really having a playbook for not only the community on how to recover and what resources that might be available to them, but what does that look like for our agency for a roadmap, and having to make tough decisions maybe with planning and permitting and what decisions you make, and being able to take some of the best practices on what an organization should do, what councils should authorize to help expedite and just make that recovery process less challenging for both the organization and the community. And so taking a look at potentially building codes and what you might want to have that look like after you've lost a number of homes to wildfire.
I think maybe just to add a little bit on what James is really alluding to with that is how are we going to permit if a fire were to come through and we had structure damage, something as simple as a deck may be able to be permitted pretty quickly over the counter, and having those plans in place so that we don't have people kind of a line of people waiting to repopulate their homes or rebuild their homes, and we don't have some expedited processes in place. So that's really what this is focused on, in addition to all the other items James mentioned.
Yeah, and as an example, I know that this might be a dated number, but very recently, I think the city of Los Angeles had just permitted about 4 new construction permits in the Palisades area. And yeah, it has just been since January, but they're, I would say, working faster than a lot of places have been able to work. So definitely helpful to have that roadmap there to be in place before and not be struggling to figure out what that looks like after.
Questions on that? I have. Would you also, let's say 1,000 housing structures were lost, 1,000 units of housing were lost. Will the roadmap look at what alternative interim housing could be?
Yeah, and that's one of the other major challenges, right? And that's seen even in major metropolitan areas where housing is very slim. I know that there were town staff who have family members that lost their home in the LA fires that had to move really far away to find a rental because everything goes away. And there's a lot more housing stock in that area than there is here. And so that would be definitely something we want to explore and having to address. So thank you.
Okay, and then on projects under evacuation analysis, would that be strictly physical projects or also process-related projects like the number of people, number of police, and volunteer police you'd need for an evacuation?
Yeah, so within our evacuation plan, we do have some preliminary numbers on what we'd recommend for traffic control points, resource numbers, staffing levels, and we want to really help affirm those numbers, get those a little bit better. But I would say, it would just be like all recommendations that can be received on how having or being able to enhance evacuation, and that could include signage, so evacuation zones, evacuation routes, taking a look at that and what makes sense for our community.
Okay, so both physical and operational.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's keep moving.
All right, the next one, public safety event, special event, public safety portable barricades. So what we're primarily looking at here is for street-based public events and helping to enhance the safety of those. And so operationally, currently, what we'll do is we'll help support by providing some vehicles that will go in front of the roadway. Operationally, that can be very challenging, whether it's our volunteer force or police vehicles that can be pulled away for a call for service. That could be a big challenge and leave some vulnerabilities. And unfortunately, we've seen throughout the United States that this continues to be a problem, whether it's a deliberate threat or more likely an accidental threat where somebody maybe has been drinking and driving, maybe somebody has a medical event behind the wheel and puts people in harm's way. And so what we're looking at here are some portable barricades that are very effective. We would explore items that are aesthetically pleasing, that can still be effective, and also operationally work. So we've been talking with our Public Works Department to explore other options, including putting bollards within the roadways, which are very challenging from a maintenance standpoint. And so what we're looking at here is, unfortunately, I don't have any photos of them here, but there are many options out there that can be quickly deployed with limited personnel and can be absorbed within our town's operational methods. Put the order of this one a little bit out of place, but this is what I was mentioning for the emergency egress improvement study. This is real. I won't spend a lot of time here because this was approved during last year's budget process. And they are in the midst of developing the scope of this project right now. They're hoping to get it started very soon and really continuing, recommending that we continue to fund this project to help really focus on one of the most challenging areas within the town due to the sheer scale of homes and the access within that area. Any questions?
Questions? Sure.
I have a question. Well, first, thank you so much. I'm so excited to see the investments that that we're making in this really critical area. And especially, I know we've talked a little bit about the recovery planning, so I think it's really great that you included that this year and we're moving toward an actual like roadmap and plan for, God forbid, we actually were hit with a wildfire or disaster like that. I still come back to the conversation we had really early on that our investment in actual fuels reduction and wildfire mitigation is still really underinvested, I would say. I mean, just based on sort of the high priority areas in our community wildfire protection plan, we're talking about it's going to take the next 30 years just to get through the high priority acres, not to mention the ones that aren't high priority. So maybe this is a question, Jen, for you to weigh in on as well. We have, a climate designation. We've developed these other designations, and I wonder if there's opportunity to develop some sort of option, whether it's a designation or something else, to start building up some more funding specifically for wildfire mitigation and fuels reduction efforts. I know we've done that in different ways in the past with different sort of priority areas. To me, this one's just so critical because we can talk about all of these infrastructure investments and building more housing and doing all of these amazing things for our community. And it's not going to matter if we're hit with a wildfire if we haven't invested to actually preventing that in our community. So is that something that, I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in?
Yeah, I'm obviously fully supportive of that. It goes back to the discussion we were having earlier. It also is reminiscent, Councilmember Pallavi, of our very first campaign, where it was all about housing, but yet I kept trying to remind people we can build all the housing we want, but it could all be devoured by a wildfire. And I'm not pitting this against housing. I'm just saying I feel like we're really underinvesting in the security of our community, and I would really like to find some creative ways to elevate that.
So I'm hearing from 2 council members there's interest in that. We can certainly spend some time and think about what that looks like and have a conversation at the second budget meeting if there's a 3rd council member that wants to support that.
Well, I have a question, I guess, related to Measure E, since it was something that was identified as Measure E funding. And if Measure E could bring in 3.5 million, we've talked about 2.9. It was 141 for the emergency services coordinator. Understanding that additional funding, if there are other plans of what that's going towards, or if that's what this could be used for, I guess.
Yeah, we do have, I think we have Measure E funding kind of maxed out with some different items, and we can bring that back and show you what those are. I'm not sure over like the 5-year horizon that we have it maxed out, but I mean, the direction, we're not going to figure it out tonight. We could come back with some options if that's the interest of council.
Councilmember Romack, would you support just staff bringing back some of those options? Like maybe it's Measure E, maybe it's not over the 5 years, but would you support at least having that conversation?
I'm just going to be the nay on this one because I don't know that it's our job. I don't know that we're at a point of we are the funding mechanism, and that's how we should be asking our staff to come back to us with. We could be a convener. We can be, there's a lot of other roles than just funding. And I actually think we're the least likely to be the funder of a landscape level wildfire protection plan because that's just not, we don't have the equipment. I mean, we're investing all of our money in vehicles and houses. Like, we're not investing the capital. It'd be a completely outsourced thing anyway that other entities have proven better at. So I'm open to being a convener and having it be like a work plan type of thing, but I'm not in favor of us like all of a sudden just like having a set aside for what? For roadside management, for landscape level severity, decreasing. Like, I just don't know that our scope is, we don't have a scope. And so I'm not sure how we get there, right? I'm not sure funding is step one, I guess is really what I'm saying. Like, come back to us with a funding plan for 5 years. No, that's not what I agree with. You want to come back with like a convening plan for 5 years. I could maybe get behind that a lot better.
So respectfully, I disagree with you.
That's totally fine.
And that's why we have different perspectives up here.
Yeah.
Is we do fund this. We've historically funded these types of projects. We funded all of the wildfire vegetation work in Tahoe Donner, on roadside management in Glenshire and Prosser, in other areas. We also have partners. That's why we partner with the Truckee Fire Protection District, for example, to be able to accomplish the scale of these types of projects.
And Tahoe Donner Homeowners Association.
Homeowner, absolutely. We have several partners, and being able to partner with them, for example, when some more funding is needed, but we don't have the staff capacity. Well, that's sort of magical, right? Where if we have some funding that we might be able to provide to lift more projects, and they have capacity on the staffing side. I think the other thing I'll say is on the climate designation, we didn't have a scope to that originally as well. We sat up here and we debated that scope.
We didn't have a scope for our housing initiative either initially.
Right.
And what I would say is, I think we need to start getting more ahead of this. That's what I would like to see. What you have planned is great, but there are going to be specific programs and projects and needs that are going to be generated from that plan. I want to start funding that ahead of time so we can move forward. Because what we did with all of our other initiatives is we had to figure out what we wanted first, and then we figured out how to fund it. We know there's going to be needs. We've been down that road before. I would like to find a way to preemptively fund it and also show the rest of the community that we are funding this, even though we're at risk for losing some of our federal funds, that we want to protect our community. That needs to be one of our higher priorities.
I'm not clear on what we're funding that the fire district isn't already doing.
There's a huge unmet funding need.
Are you talking about
tremendous unmet funding need, even with Measure T?
I think maybe I can interrupt here and say
where?
that we have 3 people that have
Thank
given
you.
us direction to come back with something, and then this is the conversation when we have something for you to actually talk about. This isn't the agendized item.
Okay. Okay. Let me throw out a comment, though, because I'm more aligned with Councilmember Pallavi. Yet I'm fully aware we need to thin the forest. I don't know what the it is, though, that the town would do. What I do know is our fire district is doing a heck of a job on all fronts. They have a big portion of their department dedicated to home hardening and wildfire thinning within the town's jurisdiction. So if we're going to, I think we need to look before we leap. Ask the fire district.
I met with the chief 2 weeks ago
Good.
specifically about this.
But I'm not hearing a clear enough articulation then of what it is you learned other than thinning the forest.
I think that's what we're going to come back and discuss.
Okay,
And,
all right.
and we'll have more information based on the projects that James has outlined here and their investigation on what needs to be done in order to better protect our emergency egress.
And then let's ask the fire district to participate.
And I guess are all you guys getting, are you just getting at, you just want to see a 5-year CIP for emergency funding? That's fine. Like, that's easy. I'm okay with that. Like, just show us how you're going to spend emergency services department dollars over the next 5 years. Is that what you're asking for? Or do you want to thin 50,000 acres of forest? I guess that's what
I don't think thinning 50,000 acres of forest is realistic, though. Wouldn't it be great if we could? No, I think it's the former, a CIP and a sustainable funding source for that CIP, so that we're doing the proactive investments and deploying that capital and those resources when projects arise that make sense, right? That have a good return on investment, that have the right partnership capabilities, et cetera.
And it may take dedicated staff.
I'm going to try to pull you back again because you do want to get through the rest of your proposed CIPs, at least so you can be thinking about them for the next meeting. And there were 3 votes to move this forward and have us bring something back. So we'll do our best to bring something back, and then you'll be able to actually get into the weeds of this conversation with something in front of you.
I think just to cap this theme, what we're not discussing are this bigger theme. Where should the money go? We're in the weeds at a CIP project level. That was exactly my first comment. like the whole conversation.
I think to address that comment when we have our second meeting, what we'll do is show you the buckets with maybe based on your priority areas and then kind of the other and give a little bit more detail so you can see where those funding sources are. The new budget software probably makes that much easier for us to pull.
And the more before that meeting, not just in a staff report on Thursday, that might even be asking a lot, I know, but it would really help us.
Okay.
Hello, Mayor and Council members. I'm going to go over the housing CIPs. So here's just a quick overview. We have a lot of housing CIPs. You've already seen the planning ones related to housing, so I'm going to focus on the partnerships and the town programs. First up are housing partnerships. We have housing partnership funding, which provides matching funding to third-party affordable housing developments to leverage tax credits, grants, and other project financing. For this fiscal year, this includes funding for Pacific Crest Commons Affordable Housing Project. This was approved back at the end of 2024 using some PLHA or Permanent Local Housing Allocation funding that we'd already been awarded, reallocating it for the Pacific Crest Commons project to help them leverage some matching grants. And they are planning on breaking ground this year, so we are very excited that we'll have more affordable housing, coming in the next couple of years through that. Next is the community housing commitments, which right now just includes the dues to the Tahoe Truckee Workforce Housing Agency, which is a coalition of local public agencies that works to create housing solutions for the regional workforce and also broadly serves the regional workforce at large. And the third is the public-private partnerships for workforce housing, which you already heard about from the planning division, which is the Edmonds Lofts project. So new programs, first up is the PLHA funded down payment assistance program, which again was some reallocation of some already awarded PLHA funding with the thought that it will be a program that offers a deferred low interest loan, which will be able to be layered with THAP and likely also the MARTIS fund to help get some of those households that are under 120% AMI into home purchases. And again, this is just some funding that's already been allocated that we're reallocating. So we anticipate that we would do probably 1 to 2 down payment assistance loans in the next fiscal year. Our other new program, proposed program, which hopefully you're excited about as well, is a home hardening and decarbonization deed restriction program. The idea is this will pay homeowners for a workforce housing deed restriction. So the home will be deed restricted as workforce housing, and then those funds will be used to incentivize homeowners to do energy efficiency and home hardening upgrades. So currently that is in the work plan for next year with the idea that we will do mainly program development with the hopes of getting it launched in the next fiscal year with around $300,000 for deed restriction purchase. Our existing programs, the Truckee Home Access Program is we're not making any major changes to that. The idea is we'd have $1 million in deed restriction purchases, which would be enough to do probably 8 to 10 depending on house prices. And also the local business option, which would probably be enough to do about 1 local business purchase. And then additionally, program administration and monitoring. And the monitoring includes all of our deed restrictions, or not all of the deed restrictions, but deed restrictions in addition to THAP, including the ADU, and then the deed restriction for new housing development, which pays developers to create new achievable housing for the local workforce. And we have currently $2.7 million in the budget for that, for the purchases. And these are new construction deed restricted homes with $21,500 for program administration. And $2.7 million is about enough to do 25 to 27 homes, depending on how much the appraised value of those homes are. More existing programs, we have our accessory dwelling unit program, which increases our inventory of affordable homes by supporting development of ADUs through grants, loans, and technical assistance. This includes program administration and building department support. We have a planner who works all of her hours on accessory dwelling units, and then we also have an outside program administrator who works on our ADU loans. We have a mini grant and forgivable loans that are funded by the town with $125,000 in the budget for next fiscal year. And then we have some of that PLHA funded loan for ADUs. And again, these are income restricted. The income is restricted to the tenants, but not the property owners, with the idea that this is going to be a shorter term deed restriction than THAP, but will be 7 to 10 years of workforce housing. And finally, we have the master plan development, which is the idea that we have had a lot of interest in master plans or prefab ADUs that meet our local high quality design standards. And the idea is that these prefab or master plans would be available for local residents at a low cost, and they know they'd meet our snow load requirements, our WUI requirements, and our design standards. Lease to Locals, we're going into our 6th year of that program. It unlocks existing housing stock as rentals for the local workforce. This is very similar to the past years. We've been doing about $500,000 in incentive payments, which does between around 50 homes is our goal. I think we're going to exceed it this year, which is exciting. And we anticipate another 50 next year. I just met with Placemate. We had our, we meet monthly, and their pipeline is not slowing down for Lease to Locals, which is exciting. We anticipate someday we might hit the limit of houses that are qualified for Lease to Locals, but it doesn't seem like that's happening in the next year or so because we still have a really strong pipeline for that. And finally, the Rooted Renters Pilot, which was a new program that was launched last July, which locks in long-term below-market rentals through homeowner incentives. And one thing to note about this is, as you saw last month in our annual or our first report out for Rooted Renters, this actually doubles the incentive budget for the second cohort. We used all of the funding for the first cohort within 24 hours. That's how quickly we had applications. And so by doubling the incentive budget, we'd be doing around 40 to 50, which is in line with our Lease to Locals program. We anticipate filling that, but as well, but probably not within 24 to 48 hours. But this is this is an increase of incentive payments and program administration to help because it is a pretty administratively heavy program as well. And then you already have seen the planning CIP, so I'm not going to go into that. And I am happy to answer questions on anything you have.
Questions?
I have just one. You mentioned some of the outcomes on Lease to Locals. You said 50 forecasted homes for this year for the $620,000 investment.
So we were at 40. We were at 47 at the end of March. So I'd say 55 to 60.
Amazing. That's wonderful. That's great. What about outcomes on the ADU program and the Rooted Renters pilot?
So Rooted Renters, we did 23 homes, which is as much as we had funding for. So yeah, 23 locked in for 3 years. Accessory dwelling units. So this, as you have seen, we brought this program back to you a few times because we had some struggles getting the loan term and the amounts right. And we've pretty steadily been doing around 10 mini grants per year, which is $1,000 just to help reimburse some of the costs of permitting. But we finally got the formula right, I think, for the loans. We are closing on our first ADU loan this week, and we have applications we have applications in various stages of the application process to almost ready to close to have just submitted for basically all of this funding at this point. And likely not all of them will go through. Building an ADU is an expensive and long process, but we will hopefully be able to inform you next year that we have actually spent all of our ADU loan money.
And just to confirm, the Lease to Locals, those are still the 1 year
yes,
incentives,
those are just 1 year,
right? So 55 homes ish. So that's about $11,200 per home.
Yeah, about that.
And then for Rooted Renters, that's 23 homes, but they're locked in for 3 years. So $15,000 per home, but for 3 years.
So the way the payments work is it increases So they get 15% at lease signing, 15% at end of year 1, 30% at end of year 2, and 40% at the end of year 3. So yeah, that's kind of how the payments work. I can't remember. I can look it up what the average was, but again, that program is based on unit size, not the household, and just because it's the majority of our housing stock, most of the properties were 3 bedrooms. We had a whole range, but it was mostly the 3-bedroom homes in that program as well.
I'll just say that's super helpful to actually see the outcomes associated with the investments. Thank you.
We'll move on to sustainability if there aren't any other questions.
I had one question.
Okay.
Sorry, it's similar on the deed restriction for new development. We know Edmonds Loft is interested in using it. Has there been other interest or projects in the pipeline?
There has been other interest, not necessarily the deed restriction for new housing development has very specific neighborhood guidelines for standards. We've had interest from projects that are outside of the 2 Gateway and downtown. We had some interest, for the Jaboom Street project, and I've talked to probably 6 developers, and now that program is with Sierra Business Council. They're the program administrators, and I know Steve from Sierra Business Council has had some interest, but yeah, the other 2 people that I've talked to were outside the program boundaries.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no more questions, well, Erin is coming up here to go into our sustainability CIPs. I just want to mention that the new deed restriction the deed restriction coupled with home hardening and decarbonization is really meant to layer those 3 priorities together and then also be for much more substantial improvements that a property may need. I mean, that's really where the metal roof replacements could come in and some of the bigger home hardening programs. So not really meant to be duplicative of the program that James is looking at, but kind of layer on top of that with more substantial improvements.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'll be presenting the CIPs related to our sustainability and climate action initiatives. We have 6 ongoing CIPs, 2 new CIPs, and 1 that is wrapping up at the end of this fiscal year. That's our Dark Skies Awareness Campaign. So first, we have our greenhouse gas emissions reduction CIP. Historically, this has been kind of a catch-all for all of our climate action efforts. And as the town has expanded our sustainability programs, especially in building decarbonization, that was getting a little bit too expansive for one CIP. So we have pulled the building decarbonization programs that have historically been in this CIP into 2 new ones. And so you'll be seeing that later. But those programs should look familiar to you. So the only remaining item in this CIP is our climate action plan update. That would be beginning in fiscal year 26-27. Next, we have another ongoing CIP. It's our climate partnerships. This includes items that we work with community partners on to fund activities related to renewable energy, energy efficiency, resource conservation, and restoration. So that includes the biomass feasibility studies, support for a green business certification program, support for the Climate Transformation Alliance, and Donner Lake stewardship efforts, including DIPS and the Donner Lake Bank Restoration Project with the Truckee River Watershed Council. Next, we have our CIP that is for our projects funded by our Building Decarbonization Grant from the California Energy Commission. And that is a $700,000 grant that funds building decarbonization planning activities. So these are all planning related. It does not fund implementation of these programs. So that includes, this includes 5 of the 6 projects funded by that grant. This grant does fund the EV charging infrastructure master plan, but that has its own CIP already. So the other 5 projects that are in this CIP include development of a heat pump air conditioning incentive program and REACH code. And that is just for development of the incentive program, but it doesn't actually fund the incentives themselves. Development of an energy resilience plan And funding for that plan is split between this grant as well as some match funding from the sustainability designation. For the scope of that plan, that is outside, not all of it is specifically related to building decarbonization. So we did include some match funding for that, and that also supports our emergency preparedness goals. Includes the equitable funding strategy for building decarbonization, a feasibility assessment for decarbonizing municipal facilities, and an expansion of the workforce education and training program that's currently operated by the Climate Transformation Alliance. And that item has a very small amount of match funding as well to add in training for heat pump air conditioning as directed by council. Next, we have one of our new CIPs, and this is for building decarbonization incentives that currently includes co-funding for the Public Utility District weatherization rebates, and that's an ongoing initiative that we've previously had in our greenhouse gas reduction CIP. And it also includes the incentive funding for the heat pump air conditioning incentive program that we will be developing as part of the grant. So as you can see, for next year, it's $89,000 from the sustainability designation. We do expect incentive use to ramp up over time, and we do expect more incentive programs to be recommended after we do our equitable funding strategy development. Our second new CIP is for our building decarbonization retrofit program. So this is the Truckee weatherization program that council authorized the budget for at the previous meeting. All we are doing is moving this project into its own CIP since it is a fairly substantial one, and this will just make it easier for us to track that spending over time. Next, we have another ongoing CIP for source-separated public recycling containers in the downtown area. This will just continue to fund replacement of the old open-style litter cans with these compacting containers that are more wildlife resistant and offer side-by-side collection of trash and recycling. And that does because they are compacting for the trash containers, that does increase the capacity, and we're hoping will help mitigate some of the container overflows that we've been experiencing, especially during our peak summer season. And this is fully funded by our solid waste fund. Next, we have another ongoing CIP for single-use item reduction. And this includes funding for our single-use foodware and single-use plastic bottle reduction measures. For next fiscal year, the programs include expansion of a reusable beverage cup program, a dishwasher grant to support that program, and a continuation of our water bottle filling station grant. Those initiatives are all funded by the Solid Waste Fund, and then we have a small amount of sustainability designation funding to include expanded bottle filling stations at town facilities. And our last CIP for sustainability is our SB 1383 local assistance grant. So this is fully grant funded. It was a $75,000 grant from CalRecycle to help us implement projects related to SB 1383 compliance. We have spent most of those funds. We just have a little under $6,000 left, and so we will be wrapping up this grant program next fiscal year. It began in fiscal year 24, and that has helped us fund an expansion of our food recovery programs in partnership with Sierra Community House, provide equipment for food waste collection in the community and in our schools, and to procure recovered organic waste products as we were required to do, and to implement new record-keeping software for compliance and record-keeping with these requirements. And that is it, if you have any questions.
Questions?
It's not a question, but just a comment. I just wanted to say thank you so much, and also to highlight today's Earth Day. And so we have an ordinance that goes into effect today. So in Truckee, you can no longer buy plastic water bottles under 1 gallon in size to reduce our single-use materials. So thank you for your work on that. That was a lot of outreach.
Additional comments?
Just a quick question. I know we'll see this in the next round of the budget updates, but overall, what's the annual funding that we're utilizing from this sustainability funding source, roughly?
Nikki, are you able to pull that up?
$500,000? And you can come back to me on that.
Let me pull it up 1 second.
If you have any other questions, or we have just 2 slides left that we can go ahead and do. And Erin, maybe you could just click through those for me in case there's some questions to come back to. For communications and community connectivity and outreach, there's not a lot of new CIPs proposed, and that's really in response to hearing that we need to communicate a lot more about the existing programs that we have. So we're not planning to like build new communication strategies, just really partner with all the other divisions on communicating what those programs are and doing outreach on those programs. We are doing a little bit more with town branding in terms of the signage around town and getting that transitioned out, and some more of our vehicle branding to align with our new branding standards. We'll update the CIP to be IDEA Action Plan. That will be coming back to you before we break for the July recess is the goal. And once that's adopted, then there might be additional programs that come out of that will get built into the work plan. So that's a little bit on hold for that adoption until we get some direction from council. And then we have the CDD software implementation listed here because that really, in our mind, is a communication tool for community members going through that process and helping better see where they are in the process. So it kind of overlaps with that. That's all we have proposed for the CIP in this focus area. And then we have questions. If Nikki has a response, she can weigh in.
On average, we are spending $466,000.
Yeah, that's close, $500,000-ish per year. Okay, thank you.
I have a communications question. Jen, that's great. We're focusing more on promoting the programs and projects that we're doing. In our CIPs, do we put funding in for outreach or marketing in some of them then? So that way we can tap into that?
We do not. We build that into the operating budget for I should say, I think there's some exceptions to that for the most part, but primarily it's in the operating budget for community engagement, where we have our contract for videography services, our contract with KTKE for radio, our community spotlights, and our hometown headlines. So we've kind of lumped it into that single operating budget.
Any additional questions or comments? In that case, we'll go on to public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on anything having to do with the budget workshop. I don't see anyone running to the podium. But okay. Comments are welcome. And your name
I actually
again?
have a comment. I'm losing my voice, so you got to bear with me.
You remember your name?
Shelley Crawford,
Shelley,
sorry.
thank you.
I have an idea. They've utilized it in Grass Valley to build funding for the fire safety. They not only use the fireman's boot, but they also do community outreach for education. And they ask for donations to pay for the flyers, to pay for the equipment. They've raised millions of dollars in Grass Valley doing that. Why can't we implement something like that here? Or does it already exist? I'm wondering. And is there a specific fundraising coordinator, that plans like the town's fundraisers for the year or whatever? Just kind of curious about that. That's it for me.
Thank you, Shelley.
There's a button on the base of your mic. If it turns green, you're on.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, my name is Robin Terrell, and I'm a resident of the Coldstream new development, or new, not so new now, I guess it started 5 years ago. And I guess this is budget relevant, but it's something that's very much on my mind, and to pretty well all the other residents. Now, imagine on a Friday night after a long, hard day's work, you're sitting quietly reading a book by the fireside, And then suddenly you hear a noise, a rumble, a deep rumble. It gets louder and louder and louder, and you realize there are diesel engines grinding away, and then suddenly they're so close, they seem to be feet away from you. So you go to your living room window and you look out, and you see this developing.
Mr. Terrell?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to cut you off right now, because if it's not on the budget, you'll have another opportunity to speak to the council in 50 minutes.
50 minutes, okay. I'll be back.
Okay, we'll see you then.
We just have to give these to the clerk.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, any public comments having to do with the budget? All right, could we go ahead and answer Shelley's question about a fundraiser on town staff, or are there any impediments to that?
Well, the town does not do fundraising events ourselves, so a lot of those are community-based organizations that are doing the fundraising, so we don't have a dedicated position that's helping to coordinate that. They're all outside of our purview, and we haven't typically been in the realm of doing fundraising. We raise funds through the taxes or through fees and that sort of programs, but I'm happy to talk to you more about that offline.
Okay, thank you. Still have council deliberation.
Back to our
Yeah,
comparison slides. And
yes.
Is that the one you'd like to start with?
Sure. And Councilmember Pallavi could, just to remind us that the point you were trying to make was about expanding the funding or expanding engineering so we could address more construction projects. Is that?
I was using that as the lens for a potentially broader conversation, which I don't think we're going to get into right now, about, just the different levels of funding and where we want to see that. Because what I heard from Jen was, sure, we can do more of that, but you have to take more from somewhere else. And my answer to that would be, great, I'm okay with taking more from somewhere else. But we don't have that. I'm not sure we're going to get into that level. If I'm just trading between these projects, can I trade between these projects? Sure, I totally can. But I'm also willing and able to trade between other projects, including housing. I think our housing investments over the years have been robust and wonderful. And I think it's also time to maybe start to, as you were asking questions, like when do we start winding some of those down? When do we ramp something up? If there's carryover, we're not spending $2.7 million on a developer deed restriction. I don't know what that answer is, but
you're talking about trading across priorities and across departments.
That was my original concept, because what I've heard is primarily, as it pertains to CIP projects, it tends to go back to both capacity, A, human capacity, and B, what I heard for the first time is long-term funding capacity.
Just to clarify, I meant both long-term funding and staffing. Yes, yeah. And
totally on board. I get it.
I apologize that we got a little bit of out of cycle with the operational assessment that was intended to come back before this, and so it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg. But I think your points are noted, and it might be valuable for you to hear the results of the operational assessment combined with the community satisfaction survey, which gives you an indication of what the community still sees as the highest priority areas for the town to focus on, and then reconvene this conversation. And maybe, we can always make budget adjustments and shift things around. So maybe we can try to reserve some capacity for that, like at a second meeting in June or something where you can delve into that more after you've had time to absorb it all. I don't want to kick the can down the road, but I think that information would be helpful for you.
Yeah, and I'm not looking to kick the can down the road. I'm not looking to create a 3-hour meeting so we can talk about the biggest budgets. You guys all know that's definitely not my intention. If we're specifically speaking to this, and I think I've just been a proponent of this for a long time, to me, the West River Street stuff, I think that's fine. That's sort of out of the way. It's going to be out of the roadway. It's going to be significantly less impactful than what happened this year. Bridge Street realignment coming next whenever we actually have a good answer on that one. And just personally, I'd like to see whenever Bridge Street goes, like that the next project, which in my opinion and vote would be Church, Spring, and Jaboom, to actually get complete roadways done so that we have like a complete downtown, a complete historic downtown at that, which has been a priority of mine every year. Like, hey, can we finish the one thing we started? I still believe in that. I still feel strongly about that. I see the impacts happening there. And I would say that's more what I want to see out of this. So like when I see the list of everything starting in 2027, I'm not sure that's realistic either. I guess is my point. And then I'll be done. And at the end of the day, I am more than happy to kill Trout Creek Restoration, Reach 1, or at least get them to, whatever we get to at 65% design, because I think we're doing that anyway, and then reassess that project, obviously, before it moves forward, which I think they were intending to do anyway.
So before we dive into shuffling, I think we're all recognizing that first conversation or the first part of your commentary is really a major shift in how we approach budgets, and I know it's uncomfortable and a little bit risky, especially this late in the game. But I think it's a really important conversation for us to have. And I agree, we don't have all the information. We need that Baker Tilly. The other thing that would really be helpful for me is understanding that cash flow, because we're clearly not, this year our expenditures are on CIPs for Public Works is going to be minuscule. Some years it's massive, right? So that is really an important element for me to understand, so that we're balancing that refunding of our CIP coffers, and then we have a plan to spend them out, because right now it looks like we're not spending them out. So those are the two things that I think are really critical. And then yes, I think we need to agendize and save some time on one of our meetings to have that conversation.
I'll jump in and
Sure.
say I absolutely support having that conversation, Councilmember Pallavi. I think it's so important. I think we often kind of get into the weeds and then we're making these trades without sort of holistically saying, okay, well, we're investing this much in sort of key infrastructure and core services, this much in the 5 different council priorities that we have up on the wall. And I think part of that is a little bit of a historical look would be really valuable. That might be really tricky, given some sort of software and IT changes. But how much did we invest in emergency preparedness 4 years ago versus where we're at now, right? Because that will help us to make, at the end of the day, we have to prioritize. And I'm totally willing to make some of those sacrifices as well. And that's why I was asking some of the questions about outcomes, because it's not just about our investments and the process. At the end of the day, it has to be about what outcomes we're actually achieving for our community. And without really understanding all of those outcomes across these different projects, it's really hard to make informed decisions. So I think it's a great point. And I think we talked about it a little bit at our strategic retreat back in January or February, the desire to have that conversation. So it's time, I think.
Councilmember
Well,
Romack.
we don't have the historical spending for you or by priority. We do have the this is not the final draft, so I don't want to give any indication that these are final numbers. They will change. But here's kind of what the budget is looking at right now. And as you can see, we have about more than $10 million coming from the general fund for fiscal year 25-26 on capital improvement. In total, we have about $28.7 million going to capital in fiscal year 25-26. That's about average of what we have over the 5 year. Each year we're spending about 20, or we're projected to spend about 28 million on capital over the 5-year horizon.
If we could have that slide sent to us, that would be excellent.
This one?
Yeah. Just for our perusing. And I know it'll be part of the big package when that comes out at our future meeting.
Yeah, I'm happy to have that conversation. I think it's worthwhile. That is what we all have to make decisions on, is where do we spend our monies. But I would want to hear the Baker Tilly report, our community survey. I think really important to understand from our community. Yeah, again, where would they like to see the focus? So, yeah, I guess I was also going to bring it back. Something we haven't touched on at all are the other requests that we received. We heard about the Donner Lake. We heard about the CFD, R2SC. I think we all know we're asking a lot of staff already. I don't know that I see a specific place to add a CIP for those projects right now. However, I could see in the future, if we're going down the path of Jaboom Street, is that part of a look at a CFD in downtown more holistically? And then I was also going to say on the R2SC, I think an R2SC for the rail yard, I think we need to finish our current R2SC process first, and then understand and see some of the outcomes, and then potentially look at what makes sense for the rail yard, which could be around when we look at the developer agreement in 2027. So I did just want to put that out there because I know we heard from the TDMA on both of those. And then one last piece is, I guess I would like to put it out also to the TDMA to understand if they had a priority of those two as well. Because I think we've talked about, we do need to look at the whole town. And so just understanding as we're thinking towards the future, if we're investing in some of those bigger projects, what would maybe be a bigger priority from them. So I would put that out to the TDMA wherever they are listening. But I did just want to touch on that since I know we heard from folks on those.
Excellent points. Excellent points.
Yeah, really good points. And it makes me think of one other gap that I'm realizing, because we talked a lot about housing, and I know we're going to talk about the homeless action plan tonight, but we don't have really anything related to sort of the challenge before us related to what solutions we're going to move forward to sort of try to solve the homeless problem, the homeless crisis that we have in our town, to support those community members. And I know we're going to talk about it more in depth tonight, so maybe it's just then, but the $25,000 in that staff report, like, that's not going to do much at the end of the day. And we know we're going to have to implement something in terms of solutions. So that just, when you were saying some of the other things, I was like, oh, that sort of triggered for me. That probably is one of those other things too.
Can I add a couple things?
Yes.
Quickly. So first of all, this slide really scares me. I don't know why you waited to the end to leave it on the board, but as I started to look at it, I think we need to understand better what you're trying to tell us here, because this looks not like a good slide or something we should be significantly more aware of in the near term, if we're going there. And I'll let you tell us what you meant by that.
I think we've seen it before, but
This is just the normal presentation that
no, this slide is fine. The next slide. Are you missing income or something?
No, so that's why this is not final. The red highlight on the 4 million is just saying the council set a target to have $5 million of undesignated
Cash on hand.
Cash.
Yep.
So we have it highlighted red. So if we're not hitting that target, it's red. We know we need to look
I
at
see.
that further. Right now, so if you look up at the top, there's a $30.9 million general fund balance at projected for fiscal year 30. This is just our different designations. We have a very robust contingency designation at 40%. That's at the very high end of the market of what people do in government agencies. So that $20 million of our general fund balance is withheld in a contingent designation. That would be if we did have a catastrophic wildfire. And then we do have some additional designations. And then we're basically saying that our undesignated cash available balance would be about $4 million.
This is actually a really, I mean, it's not, you've had
rosy.
ones that
We're
have
in a good
looked
place.
well, but this is good. And I want to emphasize,
misreading
because
it,
part of
sorry.
what we don't talk about a lot and maybe is missing in this conversation is that general fund contingency 40% was raised for the intention of having funding available for recovery in response to wildfire. So I know we're talking a lot about the $100,000 for roadside vegetation and not enough, and it's not, I understand that. You have a significant amount of money set aside to help the community in the event of a wildfire.
Yeah.
I'd much rather spend it in avoidance of a wildfire.
Well, we can talk about that, but we didn't have a chance to yet this year.
Yes, we could talk about that 40%.
Yeah, we certainly can. I'm down. I just wanted to touch on Councilmember Romack's remarks really quickly because I agree with you. So really quickly, like the rail yard R2SC, like, yeah, punt that. I'm not in favor of acting on that. On the other hand, a CFD for downtown is something I think, Dan, can you help us? Like your entire career has been talked about, like a CFD for the downtown corridor. And if we're actually getting interest, that is not something to take lightly. It's not something to pause. I mean, to me, like, you got to go get stuff like that when you can get stuff like that done, and consolidating it with another CFD specifically in Brickletown obviously is ideal from Public Works perspective. And with all of that, if we're going to bother to do that, and as amazing as that would be, you might as well look at what the costs for Spring, Church, and Jaboom are going to be, because it's all going to be one CFD. So that to me is the ultimate finishing touch on the downtown connection piece. It's something I've advocated for forever. I would support it 100,000,000% that we do find a way to act on both of those projects in a coordinated fashion. Dan, did you have anything else to add to that? Sorry. I was just asking you how long they've been talking about a downtown CFD. Like,
Yeah,
how
that
long?
was, I think, within a year or two of incorporation, that notion was under discussion. And a lot of headway has been made in that direction, right? There's a CFD in Brickletown, there's one in the rail yard, there's one on West River Street. As you correctly point out, we've got a series of CFDs, and having a singular one may be more efficient, less expensive to the property owners, more efficient administratively, would also set up the maintenance funding stream for the Jaboom Street, Bridge Street, and Church Street project should it be successful. So there's definitely some advantage, to that idea.
And if you have a willing board and you have a willing organization, like that stuff doesn't come around ever. I mean, it hasn't come around for 30 years. So I think it sends a pretty strong message, and I think it's something we should seriously consider. And I would put all the eggs in that basket to at least all of my eggs or my votes or whatever we get up here to cast our chits on where we spend money, which is nowhere, which is nothing, to get that CFD moving and put in place a person. So provide the resources to get it done, not pull from existing staff, and get it done, and get at the very minimum the design piece also done, so that the costs can be understood, both for not just from a construction standpoint, but from a CFD standpoint as well, of what that entire district would cost to both maintain but also to improve. I'll stop there.
Okay, I'll just add, because we've started on the Trout Creek restoration, I would finish it, and I would elevate the Jaboom project and the CFD above the West River parking lot. based on what I know sitting here right now, in part because I tie that parking lot with the trestle development, and I don't have a good sense of when that might open.
I'd support that.
Okay, so we're reprioritizing these things now, yeah, and I think I'll preface this with, maybe this is all of our first casts, and we still have to figure out how many fish we each have in our net.
Right.
And
well said.
And I'll just say, this reminds me of one of my very, very first budget workshops, and we for the first, and Dan pointed this out. He said, "This is are we sure? Because this is the first time we're not going to invest in the downtown area." We were starting to look at other investments, and it was still in downtown, in my opinion, because we were looking at West River Street and Bridge Street and some other things. But I want to go back to the point that for literally decades now, really since we've incorporated and we've been able to generate enough money to do CIPs, we've invested in the downtown. And we have done tiny little projects in Donner Lake, like some boulders and a few paved parking spots. And I think it is really time that our community, who is also extremely supportive and rallying around this area, this recreational resource, to say we need to start prioritizing this. And I know it is not currently in our work plan and it is not currently in our CIPs, but that's where I really feel like we have been absent. And I'm happy to support these other projects, and I'm happy to give up on something. Housing, even in sustainability, if we could move something forward there. So that's where I stand with this. I just feel like it's been completely ignored, and we can't continue to ignore that resource.
Could you just be a little more explicit? Because we do have dips. I mean, it's like lake restoration. There's been a lot of work done environmentally on the lake, and a lot more that needs to be done. We heard about the roadway issues earlier. I don't know if you're talking about the roadway, the lake, something more, all the vegetation removal, or what? So just
it's all of those things. The fact that we're not continuing the vegetation removal to the Coldstream area. I mean, there's large trees that hang over the roadway there. They're not just on the side, they hang over the roadway. There's massive erosion. We've talked pepperedly over our CIP projects about creating designated parking for the docks that's paved, so we minimize that erosion. We talked tonight about adding potentially parking management down there. We've been asked to do a traffic calming study. There's a lot of opportunity down there, and I would say any one of those would be a good step forward, and then a plan to continue, just as we have in the downtown rail yard and West River Street area.
Does staff have enough direction from us at this point?
I think we all are leaving here with a lot to think about, including the council members, for our next discussion.
All right. Any further comments before we adjourn?
Well, should we recap what we heard? That was me.
I mean, I think the only thing we really heard consensus on was to come back with a conversation about a funding source plan for fire prevention, mitigation, wildfire. We've heard there's some interest in reallocating Jaboom CFDs. I think we need to come back with some more consideration for you of what you're giving up to do that. And the CFD is a great example of an ask for, these things that we don't necessarily anticipate 4 years ago and now are disrupting the plan that we're moving forward. I think there's a couple comments that were made that it's very clear we need to give you the summaries of what is being spent in each focus area, as well as, I think emergency preparedness is just a really easy one to look at. You didn't have this division 4 years ago. You've stood up a division, you're adding staffing to it. So I know it continually, it doesn't feel like enough, but from where you were 4 years ago, it's quite substantial. in terms of building the capacity and the expertise. So I think we need to do a better job of like telling that story for you. And then if you decide that's not what you want to spend the money on, that's okay, because we've maybe just been going in a different direction with that program. And that will feed into wildfire mitigation. We will ask the fire district. I suspect we're going to hear they don't have capacity, like Dan mentioned, to do more. So then that is a fire district, the fire mitigation project. That's going to be a conversation that you all should think about what you want to give up in order to free up capacity. In the meantime, you'll hear from Baker Tilly in terms of the operational assessment. You will hear from the Timothy on the community survey and what the community has identified as their priorities, which may not be in alignment with what you're discussing today, and that might change your mind. So.
Yeah, I don't know if there's consensus on the fire mitigation.
I don't think there was. So other than us coming back with some answers to your questions, that's one of your homework assignments to think about collectively.
Yes, thank you.
And Jen, investments and where we have them, outcomes that go alongside those investments.
Yes, we can provide some of those. Certainly, some
not
of
for
our,
like every little. I understand that, but just kind of big picture.
Yeah, and that's, a lot of our programs, we can give you those. We'll try to bring those back. Some of our programs, like even, the Emergency Management Division is not really outcome driven, so that's going to be harder.
And could I ask just a couple clarifying questions just so I understand where everyone's. So, Councilmember Pallavi, I think what I heard you say is your preference for the downtown projects is the Jaboom Bridge Church streetscape followed by the Jaboom Street pedestrian.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit where Mayor Zabriskie and I diverge, where I put the streets. To me, it's the last piece of streetscape in the corridor, and that's why I want to finish it so badly. Is because to me, it's like this eyesore. So. Finishing Church, Spring, and Jaboom, just finishing the square basically, is the first thing that I prioritized. I think Mayor Zabriskie, without speaking for him, prioritizes the safety of the Jaboom Street.
That was my other question.
Segment, right?
Up to Stone Ridge.
That's what that's what he was saying. I think we've only come to agreement and decided to align ourselves because they both have Jaboom in the name, and we can both get behind it for the time being.
Do both.
Yeah, exactly. We can do them both at the same time. But more importantly, what I was saying was, I think if we're gonna do CFD, then to me, at the very minimum, getting design done and cost estimates for Bridge, Spring, and Jaboom, to me, that just makes sense from like a phasing perspective, right? If we ever end up funding it and doing it, that will be up to a future council because that's when it's going to end up coming back to them.
And can I just add on to that a little bit? I'm more in alignment with you in terms of the prioritization, and only because I understand that Jaboom Street road going up is a challenge.
Totally.
But the number of vehicles and pedestrians in that short little street compared to from the state park to West End Beach is vastly different. And we need to put some time and energy into that other space.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would agree with you probably in terms of where I put that priority. I would put that Jaboom segment is secondary, in my opinion, and finishing the downtown, to me, and when I say finishing it, I truly believe that. I think it is like that last final piece to do that.
Did you have another question, Becky?
I think I saw you nodding your head, Mayor, that you would put Jaboom Street in front of the other streetscape project in terms of priority.
I would put Jaboom up to Stone Ridge as a higher priority.
Yes,
just to be different.
So at one of our next budget meeting conversations, there will have to be three of you that coalesce behind some priority as
Courtney,
a reminder.
You want to give us a hint, Courtney?
Well, no, I was just going to say, and this is just our first opportunity to discuss this. So we have ample opportunity for public engagement in the budgeting process as well. This is just sort of the first cut.
Good point. And with that, we're adjourned to our next meeting.
So for members of the public that are here, thanks for coming early. We're going to take a little break to have some dinner and just decompress from this conversation and move into our next conversation. The meeting will start at 6:30.
Yeah, that will be the regular meeting.
I'm bad that I sucked up the whole bunch of workshop.
The stuff that you guys do is the. Get all that.
I was trying to be concise, but it's hard to know when. Yeah. And you get to do round two.
Yeah.
Or are you not in?
No, it is. I don't know. I'm just. Never have
Right?
You what?
never have a life on.
Yeah.
It's already ingrained.
And then every other Wednesday, I don't have a life either.
And I have art commission on Tuesday. Yeah, I just Tuesdays.
Okay. I don't like I'm gonna be here all day. This is what it is.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just didn't want to like.
James, when you said that about not having a picture, I just took more pictures of
Oh, nice. Well, that's exactly what we had to stand this. So that's what I was in the Capitol. Like, yeah.
They work these on Thursday.
Yeah.
Actually,
So, yeah, that's exactly. Wait, is it, wait. Yeah, Marie, those are the exact ones. So you can get multiple colors.
Thursday. I was like, oh, there's another one. Yeah.
No, that was like he was.
Some people where they're not trained. They're like so frustrated. There's this one dash. This dude was so bad at offering. He literally drove us on the side of the embankment. You saw that? Yeah. The pro just driving
Job security, James.
I was gonna.